Good morning. I call this session of the Public Service Commission to order. Madam Secretary, are there any changes to the final agenda?
There are no changes to the final agenda.
Thank you. Before moving to today's agenda, I would like to conduct a roll call of commissioners. When I call your name, please confirm that you are present. Commissioner James Alisi.
Present.
Commissioner David Valesky.
Here.
Commissioner John Majori.
Present.
Commissioner Chenna Bright.
Here.
Commissioner Denise Sheehan.
Present.
Commissioner Radina Volova.
Here.
Thank you all. Before we turn to the regular agenda, do any commissioners wish to recuse from voting on items 101 or 301? Commissioner Alisi.
No.
Thank you. Commissioner Valesky.
No.
Commissioner Majori.
Nope.
Commissioner Bright.
No.
Commissioner Sheehan.
No.
Commissioner Volova.
No.
Thank you. We'll now begin our regular agenda with our first item for discussion. Item 101, case 24-G-0248, as it relates to National Grid's long-term gas plan. It will be presented today by Chris Stolicki, Cindy McCarron, Peter Hilario, Chris Cole, Brandon Goodrich, and Joel Andruski are all available for questions. Chris, please begin.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Chair Christian and Commissioners. My name is Chris Stolicki, Chief of Gas System Planning and Reliability in the Office of Energy System Planning and Performance. I am here today to present Item 101, National Grid's Natural Gas Long-Term Plan. The draft order before you addresses the long-term plan filed by the Brooklyn Union Gas Company, DBA National Grid, or KEDNY, Keyspan Gas Energy Corporation, DBA National Grid, or KEDLI, and Niagara Mohawk Power Corporation, DBA National Grid, referred to as NMPC, collectively National Grid, or the company. I will refer to KEDNY and KEDLI as downstate, and NMPC as upstate. The company engaged with Department of Public Service staff, a consultant, and stakeholders regarding the long-term plan through technical conferences and comments on the company's initial long-term plan, revised long-term plan, final long-term plan, and a supplement with its appended study by Leviton and Associates, Inc., referred to as the LAI study. The consultant, PA Consulting, or PA, assisted staff in reviewing the company's long-term plan. PA provided an initial report, a preliminary report, a final report regarding the company's filings and stakeholders' feedback. PA also filed a report on the supplement. In addition to addressing the requirements of the planning order, National Grid's long-term plan included a chapter discussing the need for and potential decommissioning of the Greenpoint liquefied natural gas plant, referred to as Greenpoint. This reflects the agreements of the parties to the joint proposal, which the Commission adopted in the most recent rate order for KEDNY and KEDLI. Further, as previously mentioned, National Grid filed the supplement on July 2, 2025. The supplement addressed a renewed proposal by Transcontinental Gas Pipeline Company, LLC, or Transco, for the Northeast Supply Enhancement Project, referred to as NESE, which would deliver an additional 400,000 decatherms per day of firm transportation capacity to National Grid's downstate service territory. In the supplement, National Grid addressed the benefits and costs of NESE and asserted that NESE would cost-effectively address significant reliability and resilience challenges facing New York City and Long Island. I would like to first provide some background on the gas planning proceeding. At the March 2020 session, the Commission issued its order initiating the gas planning proceeding. Among other things, that order directed staff to propose a modernized gas system planning process and emphasized the modernized process must be transparent and enable alignment with the state's policies. Additionally, the order initiating proceeding encouraged the use of non-pipe alternatives, or NPAs, to potentially reduce or eliminate the need for gas infrastructure and investments, identified the need to explore methods of demand response and peak reduction, and recognize the need to avoid or mitigate criteria pollutants. In May of 2022, the Commission approved the planning order, which set forth guidelines for the long-term plans and required that each LDC file a long-term plan every 3 years, with National Grid required to file its initial long-term plan in the late spring of 2024. About a month before National Grid filed its initial long-term plan, it engaged with stakeholders through a pre-filing technical conference, through which National Grid provided background information on its system and operations at all 3 operating utilities. National Grid filed its long-term plan in June of 2024. From that point on, stakeholders had the opportunity to request information from the company. Throughout the process, there were several opportunities for stakeholder involvement. There were comment opportunities after each of the 4 reports, 13 technical conferences, more than any other long-term plan to date, and 6 public statement hearings over 3 days, which was a first for a long-term plan. Some of the technical conferences were led by stakeholders, such as one covering the topic of geothermal. All events were well attended. Ultimately, this process led to National Grid submitting its final long-term plan and supplement, which incorporated comments by the stakeholders, recommendations by PA, and staff input. The draft order before you today includes directives to National Grid that would provide additional information to further enhance National Grid's current and future long-term plans. There were over 3,700 comments filed, including comments from elected officials, members of the public, as well as entities representing trade groups, local and environmental advocacy organizations, real estate interests, and chambers of commerce. National Grid's long-term plan included 3 scenarios, which it referred to as the reference case, the clean energy vision, and the accelerated electrification scenarios. The company states that the reference case reflects the current trajectory encompassing the existing legal and policy framework, which the company acknowledges would not achieve New York's climate goals. Further, National Grid states that the clean energy vision represents its vision of the future and provides the best cost-benefit ratio at the lowest consumer cost, while seeking to decarbonize the gas system. Clean energy vision is a hybrid approach that relies on a combination of electrification, energy efficiency, and low-carbon fuels. Also, the company states that the accelerated electrification scenario incorporates higher levels of electrification, but lower levels of low-carbon fuels than the clean energy vision. The accelerated electrification scenario is modeled on the Climate Action Council's Scenario 3 from the Council's integration analysis. The company states that the accelerated electrification scenario contains a lower cost-benefit ratio and a higher cost than the clean energy vision. For both its upstate and downstate service territories, National Grid believes the clean energy vision scenario provides a balanced approach and is its preferred scenario. However, it explains that there are existing statutory, legal, and policy barriers to pursuing the company's preferred pathway. For example, National Grid states that the statutory service line and obligation to serve requirements, quote, present obstacles to the cost-effective electrification of certain segments of the gas network, unquote. For supply purposes, the upstate service territory is essentially 2 physical operating areas, referred to as the West Gate and the East Gate. The West Gate runs from Watertown through Syracuse and to Utica, while the East Gate encompasses the capital region from Amsterdam through Schenectady, Albany, and Troy, and north to Lake George. The West Gate generally has greater access to supply than the East Gate, which is at the end of the Eastern Gas Transmission and Storage Pipeline. The East Gate also connects with the Tennessee Pipeline, but National Grid has a limited ability to accept gas from that pipeline into the NMPC distribution system. Under the current forecast, PA notes that NMPC has adequate supply until the winter of 2030-31. However, the shortfall could be extended to 2040-41 if 2 supply-side projects are completed. Those would be incremental capacity on the Empire Pipeline serving the West Gate and the Energy Transfer Site No. 2 project on the East Gate. National Grid proposes to undertake an East Gate reliability assessment by which National Grid would assess how to alleviate the need for additional supply in 2042 on the Tennessee Pipeline. The analysis would include evaluation of the use of non-pipe alternatives that could alleviate the need for additional pipeline capacity, which may become available on the Tennessee Pipeline. There are a couple of potential large technology-related industrial customers in the NMPC service territory that have published plans to expand operations. It would be Micron in the West Gate and Global Foundries in the East Gate. Neither company has approached NMPC regarding details with the expected demand for those facilities. If these incremental loads come online, they will likely require significant gas supply to meet their manufacturing requirements. KEDNY and KEDLI are two gas operating companies but are interconnected and share a joint gas supply portfolio. Gas supply into the downstate area has been constrained for a long time, which in the 1960s resulted in the construction of liquefied natural gas peaking facilities, which would be Greenpoint in Brooklyn and Holtzville on Long Island. And over time, the development of the largest gas demand response program in the state. They currently have about 2,000 interruptible gas customers. Due to the difficulty in adding incremental firm capacity while simultaneously deploying efforts to reduce firm customer demand, National Grid has become more reliant on peaking supply from third parties and delivered services, such as truck delivery of compressed natural gas. PA's report on National Grid's final long-term plan indicated that the existing downstate supply portfolio would satisfy demand until winter 2032 and 33. In National Grid's supplement, it incorporated the Nessie Pipeline and an updated demand forecast. PA's report on the supplement re-examined the downstate supply stack with the addition of the Nessie Pipeline and concluded that a supply shortfall would not exist with these additions under the current forecast. In PA's final report, it questioned the results of National Grid's demand forecast. When National Grid filed its supplement, it updated its demand forecast, which moved it more in line with PA's forecast. The draft order describes areas in which National Grid can enhance its demand forecasting methodology and processes, and directs the company to submit a report identifying the improvements it is making to its methodology within 90 days of this order. Further, we recommend requiring the company to submit updating 2025 forecasts for its 3 operating utilities reflecting these improvements and recent available data. The draft order before you contains an extensive discussion of the Northeast Supply Enhancement Project and the reliability benefits it would provide to National Grid's downstate gas system if placed into service. The Commission does not have a formal role in permitting or approving the Nessie project. However, the Commission does have a duty to ensure that National Grid is able to and does provide safe and adequate gas service to customers. It is within this context that the draft order recommends the Commission conclude that Nessie, if permitted and constructed, would provide needed reliability benefits to National Grid's downstate gas system to ensure National Grid can provide safe, adequate, and reliable gas service to its customers who depend on that service for basic necessities of heat and hot water. As context, the New York City and Long Island region have faced and continue to face gas supply constraints due to its location with limited connections to the interstate pipeline system. In the late 2000s and early 2010s, New York City's Clean Heat program focused on the switch away from what is known as number 6 oil, a product used for heating which is associated with the release of particulate matter to fuels like ultra-low sulfur diesel and natural gas. Because of the continued price differential, which makes ultra-low sulfur diesel fuel more costly, natural gas has remained the more economical choice. This resulted in a significant increase in gas load during the 2010s and an increase in supply needed to reliably serve customers. In 2014, the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, or DEC, issued a permit for Transco to construct a pipeline connecting the existing offshore pipeline, which traveled from New Jersey to Long Beach on Long Island, to the Rockaways in Brooklyn at Floyd Bennett Field. As part of that project, Transco installed a connection point offshore for future reinforcement, which is the NESE project. Transco originally filed a 401c water quality certification application for NESE with DEC in 2017, again in 2018 after DEC denied the permit, and for a third time in 2019 following the second denial of the permit. DEC denied the permit for a third time in 2020. In 2019, following the denial of the NESE permit, Kedney Kedley initiated a moratorium on new customer connections to ensure it could maintain reliable service to existing customers. In 2020, in conjunction with lifting the moratorium, National Grid filed a long-term capacity report proposing several demand-side and supply-side projects to enable it to meet the demand from customers. It contained, quote, all reasonable available options, including pipeline construction, liquefied natural gas, and compressed natural gas facilities, renewable energy resources, and conservation strategies, unquote. This report was reviewed by an independent monitor appointed by the department. In his 2021 final report, the independent monitor found that, quote, despite substantive improvements in multiple fronts by National Grid, the alarming possibility nonetheless remains that National Grid's plans and projects underway toward meeting forecasted demand with sufficient supply capacity will fall short, unquote. Contemporaneously, in 2021, the Commission approved a rate plan for Kedney and Kedley that required National Grid to pursue significant demand response, electrification opportunities, and non-pipe alternatives encapsulated in the capacity demand metrics in an effort to offset demand and forestall the need for certain capacity demand projects. By rate year 2 of the rate plan, in March 2022, National Grid had met or exceeded the annual targets for all 5 metrics, demonstrating its efforts to address reliability concerns through mitigating demand. Since 2019, Kedney Kedley also expanded its compressed natural gas capacity to 5 sites and relied on that CNG to provide 61,500 decatherms per day this past winter. Without NESE, it expects to further rely on its compressed natural gas assets, with very little contingency if there are disruptions to any components to their supply stack during a cold winter day with high demand. Since the previous denials of the water quality certification for the Northeast Supply Enhancement Project, and the company's ability to meet its reliability needs, increasingly through reliance on compressed natural gas, peaking contracts, and demand-side management, such as implementing demand response programs and pursuing non-pipe alternatives, the downstate region faced a near-miss event. On December 23, 2022, Winter Storm Elliott was a rapidly moving cold front that swept across the eastern portion of the United States. Temperatures in the downstate area dropped from over 50 degrees down to 7 degrees over a short period of time. The speed of the cold front caused icing of wells in the production regions in Pennsylvania and West Virginia, caused operational issues on mechanical devices on pipelines, and shippers on the pipelines upstream of New York used more gas than scheduled. These included several gas generators along the eastern United States outside of New York who experienced higher demand than anticipated, several of which are not required to have an alternate fuel backup, unlike tariff requirements established by the Commission in New York. The result of these events was a reduction in expected gas delivered to the downstate area. Con Edison and National Grid implemented their contingency plans before and during the storm. These contingency plans entailed calling on limited available gas supply from other pipelines coming into the region, running liquefied natural gas plants, and taking the extraordinary step of coordinating a public appeal for the reduced use of natural gas. Had the supply reductions continued, National Grid and Con Edison's final available action would have been to curtail, meaning shut off, firm customers. Even though ultimately these efforts to curb demand and fully utilizing available resources enabled National Grid and Con Edison to maintain service to their customers during Elliott, it is important to stress just how close New York City and Long Island came to suffering a catastrophic disruption that could have led to significant customer curtailments, and the weather was warmer than a design day. During the event, National Grid was less than 30 minutes from initiating curtailments of natural gas to an initial group of 30,000 customers, a first step in a series of actions that could have left many of the over 5 million households in New York City and Long Island without natural gas, potentially for weeks. Once pressure from the pipelines began increasing, National Grid was able to avoid this action. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, completed a report of its findings following Winter Storm Elliott. FERC's report stated that Con Edison's service territory faced, quote, reliability threatening low pressures at its city gate, unquote, and it had to utilize its liquefied natural gas plant to maintain system pressure. Also, FERC stated that Con Edison could have faced large-scale outages if it had not activated its liquefied natural gas plant and taken other emergency measures, or if the cold weather had lasted longer. It is important to highlight that Con Edison city gates, which faced reliability-threatening low pressures, are served by the same pipelines as National Grid. FERC further noted that these city gates are at the end of many pipelines and recommended that reliability standards be established for interstate gas pipelines. To date, Congress has yet to act on these recommendations. However, the FERC report did recommend that state regulatory agencies establish reliability rules to support natural gas infrastructure for cold weather preparedness, regional situational awareness, coordination, and information sharing, and to designate critical natural gas infrastructure for prioritization during load shed. So New York has established policies and tariffs that directly address reliability standards, facilitate communication, and prioritize curtailments based on level of service. New York LDCs and pipelines have not remained idle since Elliott. They have improved communication efforts and frequently hold calls to share potential operating concerns and have continued taking steps to de-risk their supply stacks. Unlike the restoration of service on the electric system after an outage, reinstating natural gas service after curtailment is a complex process involving visiting every location with gas service to ensure service is safely shut off prior to the reintroduction of natural gas to prevent accidental leakage, and revisiting every location again to relight the appliances when service is restored. This process can take days, weeks, or months depending on how many customers were impacted and how many workers from other utilities are available to speed the restoration. The restoration process is also complicated by the need to coordinate with law enforcement and locksmiths to access unoccupied homes and businesses, and will impose significant financial costs on the utility, its customers, and the local economy. Extended outages and time-consuming restart efforts can potentially lead to property damage from frozen pipes and hypothermia or other threats to human health and safety in very cold weather. Based on the record in this proceeding, if placed into service, NESE would improve reliability by providing full-time access to a reliable source of supply, reduce reliance on compressed natural gas, which only provides a relatively small supply source, but must be trucked in from a long distance and during the coldest and worst of winter conditions, and expensive short-term peaking supply contracts that require the company to be the successful bidder in competitive procurements. It is important to note that renewal of peaking contracts not only carry a cost risk, but also a significant reliability risk because the company could be outbid, and even with a contract, it must depend on a third party to deliver the supply when needed. After detailed review during this proceeding, it is clear compressed natural gas and peaking supply contracts carry both a reliability risk and a cost risk that would be mitigated by incremental firm pipeline capacity. While the order fully describes the delicate balance between these supply options, and the benefits that NESE can provide, NESE is not yet fully permitted. As noted above, the Commission does not have a formal role in the permitting or approval process for NESE. The Commission does, however, review National Grid's recovery of costs from customers. The draft order does not recommend addressing cost recovery at this time. However, it does provide an overview of the likely impact NESE would have on customer bills. Transco would recover the cost of NESE from National Grid through a per decatherm capacity charge. The rate Transco can charge National Grid is regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. National Grid, in turn, would seek to recover these cost charges as part of the commodity portion of its bills to customers, and National Grid would not earn a return on these costs. The Commission reviews these commodity costs annually in the gas cost reconciliation proceeding. Additionally, National Grid states it would pursue 2 capital projects on its system to enable to make full use of the gas supplied by NESE, with a total estimated cost of approximately $55 million. The draft order does not address those projects specifically. National Grid would propose cost recovery for these capital projects in a future rate proceeding. Staff and intervening parties would have the opportunity to review those proposals in that rate proceeding, and the Commission would have the opportunity to address them at that future juncture. It is important to note that costs associated with NESE would be reduced by incremental revenue from off-system sales and capacity release, increased transportation and interruptible customer revenue, and shedding of more expensive and higher risk supply contracts. There would also be indirect electric commodity savings for electric customers, but these are not subsidized by gas customers. The anticipated electric savings are related to supply-demand economics in unregulated commodity markets. The LAI study estimates annual savings of over $200 million per year for the New York City and Long Island area, with additional savings upstate. Since NESE has yet to receive all necessary permits to begin construction, the draft order recommends that the Commission require KEDNY and KEDLI to develop a plan to reduce reliance on its risk-prone, less reliable capacity assets and file that plan within 100 days of any decision by Transco to abandon the project or by November 1st, 2028, whichever comes first. The Greenpoint liquefied natural gas facility was originally constructed in the late 1960s to serve as an on-system gas peaking supply asset, recognizing the risk associated with the use of natural gas for heating and natural gas supply constraints on the interstate pipeline serving the New York City area. Its value in providing reliable on-system supply and meeting customer demand on very cold winter days has not changed. Per the Commission's most recent KEDNY-KEDLI rate order, National Grid's long-term plan was required to contain specific information regarding review of Greenpoint that included demand and supply forecasts justifying the need for the facility, an analysis of the gas supply benefits and costs associated with the facility, an estimate of the reduction in the number of customers who could be served on a peak demand day if the facility is retired, a safety and reliability analysis, and a comparison of alternatives to Greenpoint. PA reviewed the information that National Grid supplied concerning Greenpoint and provided its analysis concerning the need for the facility. In its report on the supplement, PA assumed no added capacity from upgrades to the Greenpoint facility and a constant contribution to the design day supply stack using current levels. Based on its analysis, PA states that Greenpoint's benefits as a supply and reliability resource to the New York Long Island area outweighs the risks associated with the facility's decommissioning at this time. Under the reference case, PA states that the current Greenpoint vaporizers will be required to meet design day needs. While PA states that Greenpoint could be decommissioned in 2034-35 under the accelerated electrification and clean energy vision scenarios, this only considers how Greenpoint contributes to National Grid supply needs to meet design day demand. Further, PA said that, quote, Greenpoint liquefied natural gas facility must also be considered in the context of service reliability, unquote. Although PA's analysis raises questions as to whether current alternatives can fill the need that Greenpoint now meets, the introduction of NESI to National Grid's supply portfolio raises the possibility that Greenpoint could be considered for decommissioning in the future. PA acknowledges that supply-side alternatives, such as compressed natural gas, could provide a buffer to the reliance on Greenpoint liquefied natural gas, but cannot act as a full replacement. With regard to demand management programs replacing or offsetting the need for the Greenpoint liquefied natural gas, PA states that the historical trend indicates that these measures are also not feasible replacements, and while demand management programs continue to develop, many rely on willing and consistent participation by customers and are thus outside of the direct control of the company. Further, demand management programs likely will not be able to offset the natural gas demand growth that is occurring within the KEDNY service area in the near or even medium term. Regarding the possibility of fully shutting down Greenpoint, PA concludes that it is unlikely before 2050 because National Grid is obligated to provide service without interruption. If NESI comes online, its actual impact to the downstate natural gas system will need further analysis to assess the possibility of retiring the Greenpoint liquefied natural gas facility. The draft order requires the company to include, in its next long-term plan, a comprehensive analysis of NESI's ability to allow for the decommissioning of Greenpoint, including demand-side and supply-side alternatives, cost estimates, and available forecasts for gas load growth and electrification. In summary, the item before you is the result of a planning process that included an extensive educational effort, stakeholder input, and independent analysis. The recommendation is to direct National Grid to take a number of additional actions, including improvements to its demand forecasting, and engage with stakeholders residing near Greenpoint, and provide information over the next 3 years before its next long-term plan in October of 2028. This includes information on the more costly and less reliable supply assets that can be shed if the NESI project is constructed, as well as any projects needed to pursue decommissioning of Greenpoint. The proposed modifications would enhance areas of the long-term plan and provide more complete information. As a result of the actions recommended in the draft order, National Grid will be taking important steps toward enhancing reliability and decarbonizing its system ahead of its next long-term plan. This is an iterative process, and each plan creates a building block for the next plan. I want to thank the team who worked tirelessly on this proceeding. There was a large group of staff who spent a lot of time to put this draft order together before you here today. Cindy McCarron, Peter Hilario, Brandon Goodrich, Joe Andruski, and Chris Cole are also available for any questions you may have. This concludes my presentation of the draft order.
Thank you, Chris and team. I know this was a long process, and this being the fourth long-term gas plan to come before us since our initial order, I know that we've gotten a lot of attention on this particular plan, both because of the plan and the nature itself and for a specific project within it. So I think it's important to take the time to level set a few points and amplify and clarify a few things Chris said. And Chris, I want to ask you a couple questions on a few of the points you raised before I go into my statement. I want to ask about, you mentioned the firm customer shutoff and the considerable economic impact. I believe a similar firm customer shutoff occurred in Rhode Island. You mentioned that, and that, I know that's part of the record. Can you speak to that event and how that would have translated to an impact in the downstate region had we suffered a similar gas shutoff.
Yes, in January of 2019, in the Aquidneck Island area of Rhode Island, the interstate pipeline serving that region lost pressure. And for safety reasons, they had to shut the system down, which resulted in the loss of gas supply to roughly 7,500 customers. Being in the middle of January, it was quite cold. The response included pulling in mutual aid from across the region, and it took over 7 days to fully restore all the customers who lost heat and gas service during that event. The cost for that restoration exceeded $25 million, which was an average of about $3,500 per customer. If you translate that to what we can call the near miss in Elliott, at 4 times the number of customers, the estimated cost could have exceeded $100 million just for restoration, in addition to all the potential health impacts and what could happen during freezing temperatures, including pipes that could freeze and break and property damage, displacing customers and so on.
Right. And so just to be clear, that $100 million estimate is restoration, not necessarily including other damage.
Correct.
Costs of other accommodations, transportation to relocation, things like that.
Correct.
That's a separate cost that's not captured in that figure. Okay, thank you. Another thing you mentioned in your comments, the status of the gas generators and the New York requirements for backup fuel. Can you speak to whether or not the gas generators were using natural gas during this event?
The gas generators downstate were using natural gas ahead of the event, but as the temperature dropped, demand for natural gas goes up, and so does the price for that commodity, and the power gens will switch to their alternate fuels for economic reasons because their alternate fuel becomes more affordable than natural gas. So as the cold front came through the East Coast and temperatures dropped, gas prices went up, they moved off of natural gas.
Gotcha. Okay. And that backup fuel, that's there in part because of a commission requirement, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct? Okay. Thank you. Okay. All right. So thank you for that additional context. There's a bit of an irony today that I hope many of you in the audience can appreciate. Chris mentioned that the origin of this project was 10 years ago, around the time another pipeline was put in. But it was events around the NESE approval process the first time that ultimately led to the solution that we have today in the gas planning process. When it became clear that NESE could not be developed in the timeline required when it was first approved, the ensuing events highlighted the need for this very long-term gas planning process that we're talking about today. So I think it's interesting that NESE is part of this process today, having spurred the entirety of it. Now, some have asserted that NESE is an immature project and that the need for NESE was presented at the 11th hour. The truth is, NESE has a very, very rich history and is part of the origin story for this very proceeding. That it is part of the plan, again, is a very unique irony. Now, when the Commission adopted the process with the goal of ensuring interested parties have the opportunity to participate, understand, and engage in discussion regarding the future of the natural gas system in New York State, we did that, again, in direct response to events that occurred at that time. And given the outpouring of interest I see in the audience today and the several hundred emails I've received over the last few days, I'd say it's proved to be a success in that regard. Now, as with all processes, transparency and stakeholder engagement are integral. They're essential to our ability to achieve our stated intent. And contrary to the desires of some, the outcomes are not dictated by those with the loudest voices, but rather by information in the record and alignment with the Commission's mission. Now, in the initiating order, the Commission made it clear that planning over a long time horizon is inherently difficult, and that this process would, in fact, be iterative, requiring the utilities to provide annual updates and a new long-term plan every 3 years. We here at the Commission recognize the need to prioritize reliability and resiliency and take into consideration the inherited iterative nature of this process along with the relevant state laws in place at the time decisions are made. Currently, New York state law requires and includes an obligation to serve all customers seeking natural gas service. The PSC cannot change the law. The CLCPA has not altered those requirements. In fact, the CLCPA does not mention natural gas at all. If someone wants natural gas, the utilities must provide it. And if you already have natural gas, nobody is going to take it away from you. Now, at the state level, again, there's no law requiring anyone using natural gas to stop. And the long-term plan must, as stated earlier, ensure that New York's residents can continue to have safe, adequate, and reliable gas service. That said, I want to talk about the plan itself. This specific plan, like those previously submitted by other utilities, was not reviewed in a vacuum. Recognizing the significance of the investments that may be needed and the potential impact of those investments that they may have on greenhouse gas emissions, the Commission hired a third party to independently review and analyze the plans, providing additional perspective and options for consideration. This enhances the stakeholder engagement process by providing an independent assessment and aids DPS staff and others in their review of the various options and alternatives identified. To those who would argue that this process was done in a vacuum or done too quickly, I encourage you to go to our website and review the docket yourself. You'll find the reports, thousands of comments concerning them. Now again, this plan before us today recognizes that adjustments to the existing supply stack can result in increased reliability. As stated by staff, the order directs National Grid to take several additional actions related to the provision of information, as well as updates on efforts to retire leak-prone pipe with non-pipe alternatives, and the status of Greenpoint Energy Center and its continued operation, among other directives. But to be absolutely clear, today's action is neither approving this long-term plan as it is, nor are we approving the construction or the cost recovery for any of the projects contained within it. Third, I want to talk about the effects of Winter Storm Elliott downstate. Many perceive those impacts to be insignificant, especially when compared to the impacts in Buffalo, with 41 lives lost. But rest assured, this was a near miss. The storm tested the limits of our infrastructure, putting the gas system on the brink of failure. And it was only through the efforts of local utilities and their highly trained union labor, and through a combination of skill, experience, and good luck, that they were able to keep the natural gas system operating. We can rely on skill and experience, but we cannot rely on luck. We should not be gambling with our energy needs. Now, additional preparation means we avoid the need to be lucky. And the plan before us and the actions directed by the Commission through today's order are intended to remove luck from the equation. To do otherwise would be a willingness to continue to test that luck, to tempt fate and roll the dice in the face of hard-earned experience. and also to gamble with the lives of millions of New Yorkers who could be potentially left out in the cold. We don't need another record-breaking storm, flood, or heat wave to show us that the climate crisis is accelerating. We know it's here. But we also need to recognize when the resources we have are not fit to the task and the challenges at hand, and take bold steps to invest in better alternatives when we identify them. That is the purpose of these plans, additional preparation to ensure our energy needs can be met. We cannot afford to let politics dictate decisions of public safety. The Commission need only look to our mission and to our obligation to New York State when taking action. And so, if approved, the Commission directs National Grid to address the deficiencies identified in their plan and provide the deliverables outlined in the ordering clauses. Thank you. And that said, Commissioner Lisi.
Thank you very much for that very in-depth and long but valuable process. We're benefiting from your hard work. When I say your, I'm speaking collectively. At this point, I think I and all of us could benefit just as well from the chairman's comments that are also very in-depth and come right to the point. How do you address issues like reliability and safety, and not to oversimplify that, but without having plans and without having the opportunity to change those plans as you run into different circumstances? So at the risk of sounding too brief, thank you for a very good proposal and presentation.
Thank you. Commissioner Valesky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just would like to take a few minutes just to share some thoughts and ask for some feedback if I could. And thank you for the presentation, Chris and Cindy and the entire team. I appreciate the time that you took in giving us a bit of a history lesson. History matters. History always matters. And in this proceeding, I think perhaps more important than ever. So in picking up on that theme of history, I want to just ask you to explain again, and I believe it was in May of 2022, when the commission, or a previous version of this commission, considered the gas planning initiating order. Can you again summarize, from your perspective, why the commission took that action at the time, why it was important to establish a formal gas planning proceeding for the state's utilities? Why was that important?
So, that was on the heels of the CLCPA being passed, and we felt that it was important to modernize the gas planning process. Up to that point, it had been a very opaque process. There was not a way for input from stakeholders, and frankly, traditional natural gas planning, natural gas utilities are very conservative. And they needed probably a little help to see more innovative ways to solve problems in front of them.
Okay, thank you. So prior to that point, and the chair mentioned the NESE project from a historical perspective, prior to the long-term gas plan initiating order in 2022, was there any formal way, and I'm thinking back to those three instances when DEC declined to issue the NESE project a permit, was there any formal way for the commission to have weighed in at all on the project? We certainly know there's no permitted, by statute, there's no permitting authority from the commission then or the commission now. But was there any way that the commission could formally make a comment, if you will? And if there was, what was that process at that time?
No, there was no formal way.
There was no formal way at that time.
No.
So at that time that this project that has been discussed, there would have been no way for the commission to have opined in one way, shape, or form. Okay. Since the initiating order, and I'm going to a little bit again, history matters, so I'm going to rely on your memories more than my own, but I'll start us off. The first of the long-term gas plans that came before the commission was in December of 2023, which was National Fuel Gas. Is that correct? Okay. In that order and in the commission's discussion, and I did review briefly the discussion, and it's a discussion that I participated in, there was a great deal of conversation among the commission and staff at the time as to what exactly the action that the commission was taking, right? You recall that. And in the NFG plan, that order included, and I'm just going to read it, the commission declines to adopt a specific long-term plan for NFG, instead requires a variety of additional actions, including more information. You recall that, correct? Since that action, the commission has received and considered long-term plans from NYSEG, RG&E, Con Ed, ONR, Central Hudson, correct? In all of those cases, again, correct my memory, but my memory, if it's serving me correct, also in those cases, the commission declined to adopt a specific long-term plan for each and every one of those gas utilities, and instead required a variety of actions and certainly more information in I'm sure, every case. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And I would add that while the decline to adopt language does show up in the NFG order, the Commission's subsequent orders may have used different language, but essentially focused on the additional actions that the Commission was requiring the utilities to make.
Okay. Even if those specific words were not included, the actions that were taken by the commission at that time, in fact, was identical in declining to adopt or approve or any other synonym that we might come up with the long-term plans for those particular utilities, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So the National Grid long-term plan that is before us today, which includes several pages of commentary on a specific project. Chris, in your presentation, includes much discussion about a specific project, which again, this commission has no role in approving or denying for that matter. Despite that fact, and despite the fact that it may look different in many ways than the long-term gas plans of the other utilities that have previously come before us. In fact, is it not clear, in your opinion, that the product that is before us today is in effect, and the decision we are making today is wholly consistent with the previous versions of long-term plans from other utilities that have come before the commission, and that the plan that is before us today is, in fact, in that sense, no different than any other plan that has come before the commission. Would that be an accurate statement?
So I would focus on the draft order that we're recommending that the Commission adopt. And with regard to that order, yes, the order that we're asking the Commission to adopt today is analogous to each of the orders regarding the other utilities' long-term plans that have come before the Commission in past sessions, where the Commission were recommending that the Commission not take any specific action on the plan itself. In the words you used, decline to adopt the plan. However, we recommend that the Commission does adopt certain requirements and actions directing the utilities to do further things such as I believe Chris pointed out the enhancing their demand forecasting methodologies in the future or in the next increment of time.
Okay. So no deviation whatsoever from the similar plans that have been submitted by other utilities.
Exactly.
Thank you. That's what I thought, but I just wanted to clarify that. So that is what this is, and that's only what this is. It's important to know what's before us and what's not before us. So I certainly, as I have in those previous instances, and I believe all my colleagues, I can't be certain that all of those long-term plans received unanimous or a unanimous vote from the commission. I believe so, but that may not be the case. But I will be supporting, as I have, the National Grid long-term plan that is before us, with the requests in the draft order for additional information that you just articulated, Brandon, and that you spent a good deal of time, Chris, in your presentation. This draft order satisfies, from my read, this draft order satisfies the requirements of the initiating order. This draft order does nothing that it cannot do by course of law regarding any particular project. The project that you have spent a great deal of time, Chris, on, the commission cannot permit that project. It cannot deny a permit for that project. My understanding is that is a project that would need, and I believe has, approval from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. It is a project, if it were to happen, would need permits from the state of New York, which it does not at this time have. It would need, my understanding would be, permits from the environmental agency in the state of New Jersey, which I believe at this point it does not have. It's a project that would need certificates and approval from the state of Pennsylvania, I assume, that also it does not have at this point in time. I take the extra time to make that point because, again, it is important that everyone understand what is before us and what is not before us. I'll be supporting the draft order. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Majori.
Thank you. I don't have any questions. I know how I'm going to vote. Unfortunately, I'm going to vote no on this order. I will explain my vote. There's much in the order that I don't oppose. The actual order is largely directed at National Grid. We order National Grid to take action on 14 separate iterated items, and I don't object to any of them. There's also considerable discussion in the order about how the Nessie pipeline could, in certain circumstances, mitigate the risk of the type of potentially cataclysmic failure of the gas system that nearly happened in December of 2022 and could very well happen this year, regardless of what we do today. I do not disagree with this analysis. Further, I recognize that the DPS staff works hard every day to maintain safety and reliability. They are heroes whose day-to-day work keeps the light on and the heat on and saves lives by averting catastrophes. You don't get credit that you deserve because if you do your job right, you don't make the news. And you dedicated and knowledgeable public servants seldom make the news. And you know what you're talking about, and I'm not going to challenge your analysis. So, if I don't disagree with what we're ordering National Grid to do, and I don't disagree with the staff analysis of how the Nessie pipeline can enhance reliability, why is it that I'm going to vote against this order? There are many reasons. I'm not going to address every single one of the reasons. I'm going to focus on the major reasons. First, this order is in response to a request from National Grid. As the order repeatedly states, the PSC has no official role in the permitting of interstate pipeline projects. This order is not presented as doing that. Nonetheless, I am concerned that our approval of this order will indeed play a meaningful role in such a process. This request comes to us within a larger set of policy contexts that this order does not address. While this order does not approve a new pipeline, it could result in the approval of a new pipeline to bring more gas into New York State. I recognize the relationship between this order and the ultimate permitting of NESI through other processes is not direct. However, if there's no relationship at all, I'd feel much more comfortable responding to GRID's request after those entities charged with approving the project make their decisions. Number 2, GRID makes the counterintuitive claim that bringing NESI online is consistent with the state's legally mandated emission reductions targets because the new gas supplied through the new pipeline will be used to replace dirtier forms of energy and by reducing diesel fuel consumed by CNG delivery trucks. According to this analysis, there is no need for us to declare our decision to be inconsistent with the state's emission mandates, provide justification for approving it anyway, then mitigate those effects under Section 7.2 of the CLCPA, because approval actually reduces emissions. Frankly, I don't find GRID's analysis to be convincing. Number 3, there are 2 other aspects of this order that I don't find to be convincing. In themselves, these are not enough for me to vote no. However, I find the discussion both of the cost implications of approval of this order and the demand projections, in other words, the need for the project based on the latest and best estimates of future demand, to be confusing. I do think I'm on solid ground to say that approval of this order will not lower National Grid's rates. In future rate cases, Grid will petition for cost recovery of expenses for projects they choose to advance based on this long-term planning process. And in terms of demand, I think I'm on firm ground to say that the methodology of Grid's contemplating increased demand based on inquiries from large commercial and industrial customers seeking new gas service is inconsistent with the methodology used by the consultant that produced a lower demand forecast. All that said, I recognize the threat not only to be real, but to be something that could happen within a few weeks. I'll repeat what I said up front. The NESI pipeline could, in certain circumstances, mitigate the risk of the type of potentially cataclysmic failure of the gas system that nearly happened in 2022. Nonetheless, approval of this order will not do anything to help what almost happened in 2022 if it actually happens in 2025. I mention this not to add to the reasons that I'm voting no, but to suggest that whatever we do today, the threat demands an adaptive response, not simply a technical one. We do fire drills in buildings that never had a fire. I'm old enough to remember stop, drop, and roll and fallout shelters. We could think of other ways that we've oriented our society to address potential cataclysms. I'm hoping that one of the positive results of our considering this order is for our governmental partners to take note and begin contemplating collective preparedness exercises in the event of the potential catastrophic collapse of the gas system. I found the discussion of what almost happened in 2022 so compelling that we shouldn't just wait to see if a new pipeline is the answer once it's built, especially since it is easy enough to imagine other scenarios that a new pipeline will not guard against. Indeed, I don't exactly see the logic in responding to the threat of a systemic breakdown of the gas infrastructure by increasing our dependence on gas. But I do see the imperative of preparing for such a disaster. As I indicated, there are other reasons I'm not convinced that this order is the way to go, but I'll leave it at that, and I'm going to vote no.
Thank you. Commissioner Bright?
Thank you, Chairman. I have mostly a comment, a small question. So, in the more recent comments around this effort, there was a good amount of, sort of well-warranted discussion about the updated demand forecasts that the company filed with its supplement. And I do think that it was right for the company to file that supplement in this long-term planning process because this is where we plan. And so we need that information in order to plan. The supplement provided more accurate projections than the previous filing. And I think it's important to recognize that we are relying on the updated forecasts, correct? Yes. And we're also taking steps, as I think, Chris, you mentioned, and I think the chair also mentioned, to improve the forecast, and not like for the next annual update, but in the next 90 days, which I think is extremely important.
Correct.
So we're not waiting a year. We're requiring the report that describes improvements, methodologies, and processes that the company is using for this forecasting, and then also requiring them to refile the forecast for each one of their systems, which I think is really important as well, that reflect all the improvements. So because of these forecasts, and this is sort of where my question starts coming in, we don't necessarily know what resources might be able to potentially come offline for the company with this supplemental filing, like to right size the supply. So we're requiring that they right size and considering which assets the company may not need to retain. Is that an accurate sort of assessment? And maybe another way of sort of asking that question is that based on this filing, are we considering which parts of the gas system may no longer be needed?
I believe the draft order has recommendations focused on right-sizing the supply stack, and that it's not necessarily targeting components and areas of the gas system. That would be a separate analysis,
Okay.
which is also in a draft's recommendation.
And can you go into a little bit more detail there?
So I think if you look at the recommendation around Greenpoint that I mentioned in my talking points, there's a both if NESE and without NESE scenario analysis that PA identified that would need to be done around the gas supply and reliability around the Brooklyn and Greenpoint area. What would be needed one way or the other. Both of those conditions are in the draft order.
And then there's also a relationship potentially to peaker plants. Is that correct or no?
Commissioner, I think you're asking about the right sizing of the supply stack portion.
Yes.
And so there, I think the draft order recognizes at a few points that if NESE is permitted and constructed, it would allow National Grid to shed the riskier and more costly aspects of its supply stack, which is peaking contracts. That's the phrase. I'm like, which one is it? Peaking contracts, which is where the company gets a contract under short-term requirements from a third party that has rights to capacity on pipelines, and so uses that third party to get that additional supply. But that's expensive, and as Chris noted, reliant on the third party to actually perform. And so that's where one risky aspect that would be able to be decreased. And the other one is the CNG sites that the company has constructed over the last few years to meet peak demand, to ensure that it can meet peak demand. It would be able to reduce its reliance on those sites and potentially decommission three of those sites.
Great. Thank you for that clarification. And I appreciated that part of the order, especially with the idea of right sizing and the idea of how, as a plan, we are looking at the system in a way that is iterative and that we're making sure that we're not overbuilding. And I think that is one of the most important parts. And I know that a number of the comments also mentioned that. So thank you for all your hard work. I know this has been a long process. So thank you so much for all the briefings and all the information. And I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of my colleagues' questions. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Commissioner Sheehan.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris, Cindy, Peter, Brandon, everybody who's been working on this. I share everybody's thanks for your hard work. I know this has been a long process. My fellow commissioners, as always, steal my thunder before you get to me. But there's a couple things I do want to just come back to. I had a number of questions, some of which have been addressed, and Commissioner Bright asked my demand forecast question. So So one thing I do want to come back to is there's a claim, the claim has been made that additional firm gas capacity, such as that would have been would be provided through a project like Nessie, wouldn't have solved the systemic issues like those experienced through Winter Storm Elliott. So what I want you to just address is that claim and whether you agree or disagree, or how additional firm capacity would have been useful in that event.
Sure, I can do that. And bear with me for a minute, because I think I'm going to try an analogy here that takes us away from natural gas planning that may be something we can relate to. But to specifically address the question about the comments and how Nessie would or would not have assisted. So there's a couple things to try to visualize here. So Nessie would be a parallel straw, if you will, or pipeline to the existing one that's there. That's extra volume. There's extra pressure in that pipe pushing the volume. It's extra volume. Some people call it line pack. It's a technical term, but that's basically energy and has momentum going towards Long Island. In the situation of Elliott, so there were freeze-off at wells, as I mentioned, in the Marcellus region, Pennsylvania and West Virginia. There were also issues on the pipeline system and what we call shippers upstream who took more gas than allotted. So ultimately the result was there was less gas going towards the New York City downstate area than what was scheduled for, or ordered, if you will, the day before. But if you already had the capacity and Nessie in place, we would have started from a much higher level. So that would have initiated that slug of momentum and volume coming towards New York City. So when those reductions happened, per FERC tariff, there's an equal proportional cut across all shippers who have ordered gas for that day. And so without Nessie, we had a lower volume that was reduced to a certain amount. If we had Nessie, we would experience a reduced volume from a higher amount. So there would have been more volume and pressure coming into the system that day. I believe that the comments you're referring to also pointed to freeze-offs on the wells in Pennsylvania and West Virginia. The Transco pipeline network goes all the way back to the Gulf, Louisiana, and even some into Texas. So it has the ability, or the shippers like National Grid have the ability to order or buy that supply in that region where they have storage assets to be able to come onto the long pipeline that is Transco outside of that region where we had problems during Nessie. So the Transco pipeline system, which Nessie would be part of, is more diversified as far as supply goes and where they get the gas from. To my analogy. So if you picture a densely urban area, let's say we can all picture New York City. There are sidewalks around virtually every block. So pedestrians can walk and they can be outside of the physical traffic lanes where there are vehicles and bicycles where bicycles should be. So you can walk around everywhere on a sidewalk. That is the safest place to walk. Well, in order for you to get to the next block, or 6-7 blocks down the road to get to work or wherever you need to go, you now have to cross a road. So you now have to go into a space where it is occupied by vehicles, where the sidewalk is not. So there's an inherent risk, elevated risk in a crosswalk than there is a sidewalk. So in order for you to safely cross the street, you have to rely on the other vehicles to follow traffic signals and not to be and occupy the same space as you are when you cross that street. If you translate that to what we're talking about here from the supply stack, firm pipeline capacity is being on a sidewalk. But in order to meet demand, the gas companies have to rely on gas provided by a third party. That would be the vehicles on the street. You have to expect them to follow their rules and their commitments on the roadway so you can safely cross that street on that crosswalk. So if you sort of picture those two, relying on a sidewalk where you're walking It's a much safer and less riskier place to be when you're crossing a street. Convert that to the supply stack. There are parallels there, and so a lot of this conversation we've had today is peaking services, trucked and CNG. There are a lot of other variables that are outside the company's control that they have to rely on for that gas supply to be delivered to where it's needed when it's needed. That help?
Yeah, it does. So one thing I also just wanted to go over, that if additional firm capacity is not available to National Grid, as articulated in the order and in the long-term plan, if there is no new firm capacity available, what are we requiring that they do?
We would still require the company to continuously assess the supply risk associated with their supply stack. I'm sorry, yeah, the risk associated with those supply options, and to consistently evaluate ways to de-risk that supply.
Meaning,
Pursue other options.
and those are what we'll do a menu. I won't hold you to it. What could they maybe include?
Some of the options are demand side, reduce demand. The company has stated it will continue to rely on CNG, which, as we've said here, we would prefer not to be the preferred option. Ultimately, firm capacity is the less risky option, but we're clearly aware of the existing supply stack and concerns with it, and we want to make sure that the company it consistently looks for ways to reduce the risk associated with the current supply.
Okay. So with respect to, we talked about right sizing the supply stack. I think one thing I just want to zero in on is the supply constraints in the region. And I don't know that we talked about it enough, because there's been a focus on demand and demand forecasts, but that there are, that my understanding is that the supply constraints in the downstate region have been an issue for a long time and were identified in the energy plan as far back as 2008. So can we just talk about that a little bit, Chris? I want to understand what is the crux of the supply constraint issues.
In short, there's a lot of population density in a small area, and there are only so many pipelines delivering supply into the area. And so what has happened historically, a couple things. They originally constructed the LNG facilities when they identified potential shortfalls in the winter because they can't physically bring enough gas through the pipelines to serve the demand we see when it gets really cold. We talked about the interruptible clusters that were developed. You know, they operate under normal conditions. When it gets cold and that demand on a system is too high where they can't serve firm customers, interruptible customers come off. Historically, pre-2019, pre-mid-2010s, companies would look at their forecasts and try to recognize when they would have a shortfall, when supply would not be there to meet expected demand, and they would pursue, a pipeline option. And that was business as usual prior to the CLCPA. So if there was a supply gap, the companies would meet with the interstate pipeline companies, and they would build extra infrastructure to try to meet that supply. We've now changed how we're doing this, and we're trying to find ways to meet the goals under the CLCPA and reduce demand.
Okay. All right. I do just want to share my comments with respect to this proceeding and the order. One thing that I just want to share is that we all read the news, we all pay attention to media reports, and I want to share that I think that there's a narrative around this proceeding that has concerned me. These types of generalization narratives can be handy in terms of making a spin, but they often leave out important facts and details. It also occurs to me that People can look at the same facts and information and draw very different conclusions. This is typically based on a person's perspectives, their biases, as well as the particular hat that they wear. Although I personally bring a background and perspective to the commission that is my own, I am also aware that the hat I wear here is one that must prioritize the commission's mission and ensure the reliability of our gas and electric system. I have carefully reviewed National Grid's long-term plan, the PA consulting reports, and the comments from stakeholders. First, I want to establish and reiterate what my colleagues have already said, what we are and aren't doing here today. We aren't approving a pipeline project. We aren't approving NESE. We don't have a regulatory role in that project. We aren't approving the long-term plan. We aren't greenlighting any particular projects or endorsing them either. However, what the plan does very clearly state is that we have some serious supply issues in New York. Those are the facts. We need to be aware of that, and we need to be cognizant of that. Based on my review of the record, I believe that the significant supply constraints in National Grid's downstate territory create a reliability risk, one that we saw play out during Winter Storm Elliott. As FERC noted in its report on the storm impacts, we were 30 minutes away from a catastrophic event that would have left thousands in New York City, without heat at Christmas time. This is not a speculative risk. This is a very real one. It is one that we are facing today, as Commissioner Majori points out. I have a different take on what to do about it. It's important to note that Winter Storm Elliott was not a design day, and a design day being a worst-case scenario in terms of demand. So some view the fact that we survived it by the skin of our teeth as an illustration that the system worked, that by cobbling together a portfolio approach, we were able to avoid a major catastrophe. I personally view it as a huge red flag warning. That's my take. So to date, the downstate system reliability risks have been managed with what I personally see as more of a Band-Aid approach. You can call it diversified portfolio, which it is, but when we look at the time that's passed since we've identified this problem to today, this is not, to me, the smartest solution. So as staff explains in the order and in the order as the order articulates, additional firm capacity would address the risk. And I think that's just important finding that's in this order that we need to highlight. As an independent commissioner making a decision based on the record, to sum up my own narrative, I believe it's about reliability. And for that reason, I support the order.
Thank you. Commissioner Vlhova?
All right, so I come at the tail end of excellent remarks and questions as always, and I have a lot of questions. So please bear with me. We will be here for a little while longer. I want to get a little bit more into the technical details of the forecasts and what they tell us about reliability and what we mean when we say reliability. So my first question is, as I understand it, the filings in question here, the final long-term gas plan, the company's supplement, and PA Consulting's reports on those documents describe two different reliability issues. One is the reliability of overall supply. Is there enough gas in National Grid's downstate system? I mean, obviously system as a whole, but we're really focusing, I'm focusing my questions on downstate. Is there enough gas in National Grid's downstate system as a whole to meet design date conditions? And the other kind of reliability that is discussed is system reliability, or what I'm calling system reliability for purposes of this conversation. It's the question of, can the system maintain adequate pressure to avoid outages? Is that correct?
Yes. I mean, gas utilities have to maintain both adequate supply coming into the system and then adequate system pressures to maintain that reliability for the customers who depend on it.
Okay, thank you. So just to confirm, and I'm using my own non-technical expert language here, but the filings relate to two different kinds of reliability. There's reliability of overall supply, and there's system reliability having to do with maintaining adequate pressure to avoid outages. All right. The filings also describe what PA Consulting calls, and what we've discussed today, several supply stack options for addressing both reliability needs. And I understand the supply stack as being the different combinations of resources that the company could and has cobbled together to meet both of its reliability needs. And examples that we've discussed already include demand response and energy efficiency, compressed natural gas, liquefied natural gas, including the Greenpoint vaporizers, peaking services, and when available, firm pipeline capacity. Is that correct?
Yes, but I view it in the context of meeting customer demand at all times.
Okay.
But also note that firm pipeline capacity is the base load in the first option, and also the most affordable. The other parts of the supply stack come after they've fully utilized that firm supply.
Okay. That's helpful context. And that's for both types of reliability, both for reliability of supply and for system reliability.
For system reliability, it could depending on the physical operation of the system at the time.
Okay. Thank you. So I'd like to go to address the first kind of reliability first. That's the reliability of supply. Is there sufficient gas in the system overall to meet customer demand? Is it fair to say that under the updated 2025 forecast that the company submitted in its supplement, the gap between supply and demand that the company's final long-term gas plan initially identified is anticipated to occur quite a few years later than it originally estimated?
Yes, similar to the conversation we had with Commissioner Sheehan. If we're only looking at the supply stack, you're correct.
Okay. So that's the reliability of supply.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. So in theory, that leads me to conclude, and PA Consulting also, in their report on the supplement, to conclude that the company could have more time in order to consider alternatives to NESI in order to fill the gap in the reliability of overall supply. That it's not something that it needs specifically in 2027, 2028, for example, when NESI could go into service.
From the supply stack reliability, yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. So now turning to the second kind of reliability, that's the ability of the system to maintain adequate pressure and avoid outages. I want to confirm, I think this has already been discussed, but to make sure I understand, did Winter Storm Elliott occur during design day conditions? And if the answer is no, what does that mean?
So the answer is no. Both parts of the supply stack and the conversation here. The first thing you need is the correct volume that the company's ordered, if you will, the day ahead to be at the city gates, and then they need to be able to transport that gas on an extreme winter weather day to every customer at every end of the system. So that would be a design day. Winter Storm Elliott, the temperature reached a low of 7 degrees, where a design day is a historical temperature of the load that they expect to experience on an average temperature of 0 degrees.
Okay. And what is the significance of that? Why does that matter?
I don't.
Or is there any significance to that? That the fact that Winter Storm Elliott did not occur on a design day? Sorry.
Because they had contracts and assets lined up to meet what they expected the forecast to be. And they weren't able to fully utilize those assets because of one, the nature of the components of the supply stack did not allow them to pull on those in an emergency situation, meaning they have to plan a day ahead to utilize peaking assets and the compressed natural gas facilities. And also coupled with the reductions in supply coming into New York City.
Okay.
You need all those supply resources to show up to the city gate as planned based on the forecast to serve the load you experience at those temperatures.
Thank you. I'm looking through my questions to take out anything that has already been answered. Okay. So now getting to the supply stack and what the company's options are to address specifically the second kind of reliability, system reliability, maintaining adequate system pressure. As I understand it, before the recent development with NESI becoming a possibility, the reason the company proposed to add vaporizers 13 and 14 to the Greenpoint LNG facility after the moratorium was in response to the lack of system reliability. Is that correct?
It would be both parts of the conversation we're having.
Both supply and-
volume
okay.
and then the pressure needed for physical operations.
Okay. So if the company, or excuse me, if NESI doesn't go into service for whatever reason, its permits are denied, for example, or the company decides that it's uneconomical, does that mean the company might find or would find that it needs to proceed with vaporizers 13 and 14, or would it have other options to procure both overall supply reliability and system reliability?
So the company could find that it needs to proceed with vaporizers 13 and 14, as there are no other options to procure system reliability services that we know of today, other than potentially increasing the reliance on CNG.
Okay. So to sum up my understanding, based on this conversation, based on the record, not accounting for the possibility of some miracles happening, the company has three options to ensure system reliability and maintaining adequate pressure that also have overall supply reliability benefits. It's NESI, it's Greenpoint vaporizers 13 and 14, or it's the increasing CNG.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Would your answer to that question be any different if you were relying on the 2024 forecast or the 2025 forecast? Does which forecast you use make a difference to that question?
It does not.
Okay, thank you. Taking a different focus now, moving away from the forecast, I'd like to address the cost of the project, NESI specifically, since it is such a big focus of this discussion. PA Consulting raised reasonable concerns in the supplement report of the possibility of stranded assets if NESI goes into service, because the company may end up procuring more supply than it needs. Again, this relates to the first kind of reliability, the availability of total supply to the system. So I have two questions here. First, are there similar concerns on the supply reliability side that there might be stranded assets if NESI goes into service?
No.
And can you describe why not?
Because if you look at either forecast, you will reach a point where those assets are fully utilized.
That went back to my earlier question. Would it make a difference if you were relying on the 2024? Okay.
Correct.
Or the 2025 forecast. Okay. Lastly, and this is my last question, I promise, I would like to make sure I understand the procedural posture of this case relative to the CLCPA. as I understand it, there's no Section 7.2 inconsistency analysis here for two reasons. First is because we're not approving any specific projects for, or cost recovery for such projects. And second, and I think equally importantly, because we don't have the information on the record to do an analysis, because the company hasn't provided us with the supply stack that it's going to invest in, right? So how can you determine overall emissions impacts if you don't know what all the supply resources in that portfolio will be? Is that fair to say?
I can handle that. I'd like to start by going to what CLCPA Section 7.2 specifically requires, and it requires that in conjunction with issuing permits, licenses, and other administrative approvals and decisions, state agencies such as the Commission must consider whether such decisions are inconsistent with or will interfere with the attainment of the statewide greenhouse gas emission limits of the CLCPA. So the draft order before you is a decision, and it does consider the impacts of the actions that it does take. And that goes back to, it includes requiring National Grid to improve its demand forecasting and report on how it'll optimize its supply sources if NESI is permitted, and how it will address reliability concerns in the alternative, and the various other specific requirements of the order. So the CLCPA, the draft order does contain a CLCPA 7.2 analysis of those actions. However, as has been noted multiple times, the draft order doesn't take any action on NESI itself, on vaporizers 13 and 14, and so there is no action. The Commission, in assessing the impact of the Commission's decision, there is no action on those items that is required to be analyzed in this at this time.
Thank you. I will note generally that the emissions impact of whatever supply portfolio or supply stack the company ultimately proposes is of extreme interest to me. So it is something that I will be tracking and following up on and asking for a full and complete analysis. Okay, those are all my questions. I'm going to now turn to my comments, which I will endeavor to keep brief. I have to admit, I don't like either the analysis or the decision in this order, but our job as regulators isn't to like things. It is to make decisions based on the record, irrespective of our personal views, as my colleague Commissioner Sheehan mentioned earlier. And in this case, the record leaves me with no doubt that a system reliability need exists. Again, that's reliability having to do with maintaining adequate system pressure and avoiding catastrophic outages. And a solution is needed. I also believe the record shows that out of the currently known and available options, NESI would provide the necessary reliability services. The order requires the company to develop or propose a supply stack of resources that it ultimately proposes to adopt to meet both supply reliability and system reliability. And I fully expect the company to identify and act on every opportunity to cull all assets that could become unnecessary if NESI went into service, including existing compressed natural gas facilities, Greenpoint vaporizers 13 and 14, and decommissioning Greenpoint as a whole. I also want to acknowledge that acknowledging a reliability need and that NESI could fill that need is not a blank check for spending. And we will hold the company to task for maintaining as an economic and efficient supply portfolio investment, and for accurately and fully analyzing, or I would like to see in the future an accurate and full analysis of greenhouse gas emissions and disadvantaged community impacts. When I emphasize I'm not saying my colleagues won't either. I'm just recognizing that how and when that happens is a procedural and legal issue. In essence, this order acknowledges that avoiding a catastrophic failure is worth the potential costs of a project like NESI. Such a failure falls into what I might characterize as a hopefully low probability but extremely high risk event if you're looking at a threat matrix. And I think the case studies cited in the order unfortunately suggest that while it thankfully is not a frequent occurrence to see a Winter Storm Elliott type of an event, it is not unlikely to happen at some point in the future again. And also given the fact that many of the underlying issues that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission identified in its report on Winter Storm Elliott have not been addressed, and we don't know when they will be addressed, that unfortunately makes me think there's a high likelihood at some point in the future that there might be such a risk again. I also want to acknowledge the irony is not lost on me that we're talking about the use of fossil fuel infrastructure to mitigate the risks to human health and safety of climate change, because climate change is exacerbating extreme weather events. But the reality is that we have all inherited the energy system as we find it today. It still shocks me that it wasn't until New York launched our prior colleagues at the commission launched the long-term gas planning process, there was no long-term gas planning in the United States. Massachusetts might have beat us to initiating a proceeding, I'm not sure, but we are certainly the first state to complete a process. And compared to the electric system, the gas system has been woefully behind on things like national reliability standards and coordinated planning. So the fact that we are the first to go through the first round of plans for our gas utilities in the country in the history of the gas system is not lost on me. And I think it's something we all need to recognize. And the reason that we're having to make a decision on whether there is a reliability need to begin with and whether a pipeline could meet that need is because this is the system that we have inherited. And I think the ultimate takeaway here for me is that we may have inherited the system, but it's up to us what system the future will inherit. And this just tells me that we need to work even harder toward avoiding the potential need for future pipelines and asking our utilities to work harder and do better with non-pipe alternatives, with demand response, with gas efficiency, with electrification, in the interest not just of achieving the goals of the CLCPA, but also customer benefits, affordability, and just a more efficient and reliable gas system. And with that, and with some regret, I will be supporting the order because I do think it is the right outcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Now do call for a vote. My vote is in favor of the recommendations contained in the draft order as discussed. Commissioner Alisi, how do you vote? Yes. Thank you. Commissioner Valesky?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Majori?
No.
Thank you. Commissioner Bright?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Sheehan?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Villova?
Yes.
Thank you. The item is approved and the recommendations are adopted. Before we move into our second item, we will now take a break. Good afternoon. We have reconvened. We'll move now to the second item for discussion today. It is a informational item, a non-voting item. Item number 202, case 22-M-0149, as it relates to the second informational report on overall implementation of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, the CLCPA. It'll be presented by Jessica Waldorf, Rob Haberman, Ann Sorrentino, Michaela Loeb, Ezra Scott, Marco Padula, Chris Cole, and Kevin Manns are also available for questions. Jessica, please begin.
Thank you, Chair Christian, and good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Jessica Waldorf, and I am the Chief of Staff and Director of Policy Implementation at the Department. I'm here today with other members of staff to present the second report on overall implementation of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, or as I will refer to it throughout the presentation, CLCPA. I'm going to be using a PowerPoint presentation to provide a visual overview of the report. However, a more comprehensive written report will also be filed in the CLCPA docket. Next slide, please. Since the enactment of the CLCPA in 2019, the Commission has made significant progress in implementing its objectives, including the emissions reduction and clean energy targets shown here, some of which the Commission has increased above the CLCPA's original requirements, including increases to the distributed solar and energy storage targets. Next slide, please. The Commission's May 2022 CLCPA initiating order instituted this proceeding to both assess the progress made towards meeting the CLCPA's mandates and to provide policy guidance as necessary for the additional actions needed to help achieve the objectives. Similar to the first annual report that was issued in July 2023, this second report provides a summary of recent events and outcomes in relation to several key areas of implementation of the law, including renewable electricity and energy storage, transmission, energy efficiency and building electrification, and transportation efforts. It also provides an overview of added clean energy generation and emissions reductions across all CLCPA-related programs, a summary of electric and gas cost recoveries for those programs, and gas and electric utility ratepayer impacts. Notably, this report includes both a 2023 and 2024 historic accounting of cost recoveries and, for the first time, a 5-year future forecast of the typical customer bill impacts of the total CLCPA-related funding authorized by the Commission to date for various programs. It focuses on the direct effects of programs over which the Commission has oversight authority and does not account for programs implemented by other state agencies that are funded from sources outside of ratepayer funding, for example, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative funding. Staff did not submit a CLCPA annual report last year due to the work that was ongoing to complete the first Clean Energy Standard Biennial Review, which is a key component of this CLCPA annual report. Rather than present data and analysis in fragments, DPS staff opted to issue this next report in 2025 to provide staff with additional time to conduct useful analysis, complete the first biennial review of the Clean Energy Standard, and support a more comprehensive overall report. There are several direct and indirect benefits of CLCPA implementation that this report does not quantify, including economic and workforce development impacts, improved public health outcomes, and increased tax revenue. These benefits will materialize across a variety of sectors, parties, and timeframes, and are therefore difficult to standardize and quantify in a yearly report. However, the report does recognize that there are several other types of benefits that accrue from the CLCPA. First, wide-scale deployment of renewable energy resources has the effect of lowering production and resource costs by harnessing the energy potential of renewable generation, with the added benefit of allowing us the potential to displace the least efficient and highest cost generation resources that are currently dominated by fossil fuels. Second, as the Commission's energy efficiency programs have emphasized, achievement of annual energy savings at the lowest cost, energy efficiency measures in New York hold the potential to drive significant energy savings above federal standards, ranging from a 9 to 12% reduction in 2030 and an additional 3 to 5% in savings from building electrification programs. For low-income customers, energy efficiency upgrades have contributed to long-standing reductions in energy burden, further advancing energy affordability for vulnerable New Yorkers. Although this report includes all of the Commission's approved programs that align with the objectives of the CLCPA, many of the programs were authorized prior to its enactment. For the last several decades, the Commission and the state have established emissions reduction targets and clean energy goals. Indeed, the Commission's work on clean energy programs, notably energy efficiency, goes back several decades to 1998, when the Commission approved the Ratepayer-Supported Systems Benefit Charge Program and designated NYSERDA as its program administrator. Thus, it is difficult for us to clearly delineate program costs and outcomes that are directly related to the CLCPA versus the long history of decisions related to energy efficiency, clean energy, and energy affordability, as well as programs and investments that provide system-wide benefits and uphold the Commission's legal mandate to provide safe and reliable service at just and reasonable rates. This report discusses some of the other rate components that contribute to utility rate increases, while recognizing that CLCPA costs are one of many components that make up a customer's total utility bill. Next slide, please. This slide provides an overview of how this year's report is structured. It is important to note that this year's report focuses on the key actions taken since the first report issued in July 2023 and does not duplicate the portion of the prior report that provided the historical context behind several of the Commission's key programs, including the Clean Energy Standard and Clean Energy Fund. Instead, readers and viewers are encouraged to visit that first report to learn more about the history behind these efforts. Next slide, please. This slide provides an overview of the various rate components outside of CLCPA, outlining the significant compounding factors beyond the CLCPA that contribute to utility rates. New York was one of the first states to develop utility infrastructure, and therefore, a large amount of equipment is rapidly approaching or at the end of its useful life. There are thousands of miles of aging utility poles, substations, and other utility infrastructure where utilities are making investments to maintain reliability and increase resiliency of the systems. For example, nearly 37% of Rochester Gas and Electric Corporation, or RG&E's, electric system relies on over 3,000 miles of underground systems that include cables over 100 years old. This necessitates significant investments in the utility systems to maintain and operate efficiently and safely, and the replacement of old infrastructure carries higher capital costs than was experienced in the past. Rising commodity prices and greater exposure to global commodity markets is also driving increases in energy supply cost and in the cost for equipment that is necessary to build, maintain, and service the energy infrastructure in New York State. There are also increasing utility costs related to property taxes, salaries, and healthcare benefits, and information technology systems for both system security and customer support and protection. For example, New York's utilities and their customers pay an outsized amount of non-income taxes, including property taxes, compared to utilities across the country. Specifically, in 2023, 10 to 30% of a New York utility customer's electric delivery bill was for non-income taxes, including property taxes, versus the 8% national average of pure utilities. New York is experiencing a period of unprecedented increases in electric demand after years of relatively flat demand growth, putting further pressure on the need to upgrade aging utility infrastructure. Meeting this increased demand due to economic development and electrification will require billions of dollars in investments, including to develop new and maintain existing generation resources. While the CLCPA necessitates programs to spur the development of renewable energy and zero-emission resources, investing in any form of new generation to meet increased demand will require significant investment, in turn impacting utility rates. Next slide, please. Here's an example of how various factors outlined on the prior slide break down within a utility rate case and the utility's revenue requirements. You will not see a clear breakout of, quote, CLCPA costs, since these costs are split between several categories, including operations and maintenance and labor. However, this slide puts into context how much these different components are truly contributing to utility rates. Next slide, please. While the report identifies these various rate components, including the CLCPA, the report also recognizes the Commission's steadfast commitment to advancing the goals of this law while staying true to its statutory mandates to provide safe and reliable service at just and reasonable rates. The report highlights several of the Commission's recent actions to mitigate ratepayer impact through innovative program design and implementation. Many of the actions here also highlight the reallocation of funding to ensure that ratepayer dollars are being used cost-effectively. This slide presents a few examples of Commission actions and the associated ratepayer impact. For example, earlier this year, the reallocation of over $360 million from the New York Sun program and accrued interest earnings to cover covered nearly 24% of the budget for NYSERDA's energy efficiency and building electrification portfolios for the years 2026 through 2030. The Commission also provided $340 million in the near term to relieve in the form of relief to ratepayers for the 2025 through 2026 period by directing the use of existing cash balances rather than new collections from customers. The Commission also authorized NYSERDA to hold voluntary renewable energy certificate sales, resulting in $1.5 million in avoided costs to ratepayers for the 2025 large-scale renewable Tier 1 compliance year. The Commission has upheld these same principles when considering utility rate cases. Specifically, the Commission has approved multi-year rate plans that levelize increases and embedded affordability provisions, authorized targeted arrears reduction programs to address pandemic-related and ongoing customer debt, and reinforce consumer protections through stronger performance standards and enforcement authority, including negative revenue adjustments against utilities for failing customer service metrics in 2024 in the amount of $28.9 million. Next slide, please. The report also recognizes the Commission being a leader among state agencies in the implementation of Section 7 of the CLCPA. Section 7.2 and Section 7.3 of the CLCPA require state agencies to consider whether its decisions interfere with the attainment of statewide greenhouse gas emissions limits and prioritize greenhouse gas emission reductions in disadvantaged communities. Section 7 adds to the Commission's core mandate of safe and reliable service and just and reasonable rates, and therefore the Commission considers this careful balance between its mandate and the application of Section 7 in its decisions as evidenced throughout the report. For example, in utility rate cases, the Commission must find a joint proposal or recommended decision as a whole is consistent with achieving the CLCPA's greenhouse gas emissions reduction requirements. If there are any inconsistencies based on the Commission's mandate to ensure safe and reliable service, the rate order identifies alternative greenhouse gas mitigation measures. In addition, we find joint proposals or recommended decisions we ensure rate proposals do not disproportionately burden disadvantaged communities. Next slide, please. In terms of progress made towards CLCPA renewable energy targets, the Commission, in conjunction with NYSERDA, has made significant progress in advancing the development of renewable energy and transmission projects, as well as decreasing the greenhouse gas emissions in the electric sector. With nearly 100 renewable energy and transmission projects in active operation or development, New York continues to make significant progress towards the CLCPA's goal of 70% renewable energy and towards the zero-emission grid by 2040 targets. This builds on the state's previously existing renewable energy resources, including the state's substantial amount of hydroelectric and zero-emission nuclear generation. In December 2024, the Department of Environmental Conservation published the New York State statewide greenhouse gas emissions report that provided a detailed account of greenhouse gas emissions in the state from 1990 through 2022. This report showed that emissions in the electricity sector represent the largest decrease in fuel combustion emissions since 1990, with a 56% reduction in emissions. This shows some of the significant progress the state has made in decreasing the emissions associated with electric generation to date. Next slide, please. The Commission has a longstanding policy of promoting renewable energy resources to meet our responsibility to preserve environmental values and conserve natural resources. Prior to the adoption of the CLCPA, the Commission implemented programs and mechanisms designed to support the decarbonization of the state's electric system. These initiatives have since been expanded where necessary to support the CLCPA's electric targets. The actions shown here are a subset of additional actions taken since the first CLCPA report to support the development of both large and small-scale renewable energy resources and energy storage development. Specifically, the Commission updated the energy storage target to 6 gigawatts by 2030 and advanced implementation plans to support the development of both bulk and retail energy storage projects. The Commission also launched the Grid of the Future proceeding, which is aimed at harnessing the power of grid flexibility to create a more resilient, affordable, and clean electric grid. In 2025, the Grid of the Future Flexibility Potential Study found that by 2040, grid flexibility could avoid nearly $3 billion per year in power system costs that could be used to compensate participants and provide cost savings to all ratepayers. Next slide, please. The Commission took further actions to advance renewable energy efforts, including significant steps to build on the state's success developing distributed solar energy projects. The Commission provided funding to incentivize 500 megawatts of additional solar projects that directly benefit low-income customers above statewide goals while addressing barriers to development and through ongoing interconnection reform. The Commission also issued the first review of the Clean Energy Standard, which laid out a pathway to achieving a 70% renewable electricity goal through improvements to the state's renewable energy procurement mechanisms. Next slide, please. The Commission has also taken several steps to advance transmission and distribution infrastructure investments necessary to integrate the new clean energy generation and electric load to the state's grid. In furtherance of the work mandated by the CLCPA and the Accelerated Renewable Energy Growth and Community Benefit Act, required the Commission to revisit the framework the Commission and the utilities rely on to invest in transmission and distribution infrastructure. In response, the Commission has undertaken several steps to implement forward-looking transmission planning. These actions include grid planning reforms, targeted infrastructure upgrades, deployment of resilience measures, and the integration of advanced technologies. Together, they reflect a more proactive, data-driven, and collaborative approach to system planning that will ensure system reliability, cost-effectiveness, and equitable access to clean energy benefits. One of the primary ways the Commission is advancing this work is through the Coordinated Grid Planning Process, or CGPP, which is designed to plan for and optimize New York's bulk resources. The CGPP is complemented by the proactive planning process, which is evaluating the transmission and distribution needs to enable transportation and building electrification, as well as future economic development. Next slide, please. The Commission took significant steps in the proactive planning proceeding with the approval of 29 urgent infrastructure projects that cost-effectively address near-term electrification needs. The average cost of urgent infrastructure projects was $1 million per megawatt to enable 640 megawatts of new electrification, significantly less expensive than meeting the same need with on-site generation. The Commission also withdrew its transmission need determination for the New York City public policy transmission need due to federal actions halting the development of offshore wind, finding that this was in the best interest of ratepayers, avoiding billions of dollars in transmission infrastructure that would not be needed or utilized until an unknown future date. Next slide, please. The building sector remains the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in New York State. The CLCPA strengthened the Commission's efforts, and through the utility-administered portfolios and NYSERDA's activities, ratepayer funds have been strategically invested to accelerate progress. The energy efficiency and building electrification orders, approved by the Commission earlier this year, are the primary way the Commission has aligned the state's building decarbonization efforts with the CLCPA. In May of this year, the Commission authorized $1 billion in annual energy efficiency and building electrification investments to support both low to moderate income and non-low to moderate income households across the state. The Commission has also issued guidance and adopted rules for utility-operated thermal energy networks, which are currently under review by the Commission, and took the necessary steps to effectuate the New York Power Authority's Renewable Energy Access and Community Help, or REACH program, which expands renewable energy access to disadvantaged communities and low-income individuals. Next slide, please. Building on this action in November 2024, the Commission approved updates to the dynamic load management programs for the state's major electric utilities and launched the new Bring Your Own Battery offerings for National Grid, NYSEG, and RG&E. These changes expand opportunities for residential battery systems to participate in demand response, strengthening distribution system flexibility, and aligning program design across utilities. The Bring Your Own Battery program, coupled with the existing Bring Your Own Thermostat program, improves system efficiency, integrate more distributed energy resources, and increase customer participation in the clean energy transition. The Commission also supported local clean energy efforts by approving the New York Municipal Power Agency's petition to expand local efficiency services and support deeper decarbonization efforts at the municipal level. Next slide, please. Since July of 2023, the Commission has continued to drive targeted investments in fast charging corridors, transit fleet electrification, and community-based electric vehicle charging access, ensuring that the benefits of clean transportation reach all regions of the state. The Commission's actions, including through the Electric Vehicle or EV Make Ready program, managed charging programs, and medium and heavy-duty proceeding, have contributed to the successes achieved in the clean transportation sector, including an increase in the number of EVs registered in New York State by more than 2,000% since 2015, from about 13,000 vehicles to more than 275,000 vehicles as of February 2025. Additionally, as of June 2025, more than 17,000 public charging ports are located throughout New York State, including more than 2,300 direct current fast charging ports and more than 15,000 level 2 chargers at approximately 4,900 locations. Next slide, please. The CLCPA requires that commission decisions do not disproportionately burden disadvantaged communities and that disadvantaged communities receive substantial benefits from programs that implement the CLCPA's objectives. Specifically, the CLCPA requires the Commission to direct available programmatic resources in such a manner that disadvantaged communities receive a minimum of 35% with a goal of 40% of the overall benefits of spending on clean energy and energy efficiency programs, projects, or investments. It also included a specific requirement for a minimum of 20% of investments in residential energy efficiency, including multifamily housing, are invested in a manner that will benefit disadvantaged communities, including low to moderate income consumers, and includes reporting requirements for energy savings and clean energy market penetration in the low to moderate income market and in disadvantaged communities. The Commission has already acted in multiple proceedings to direct clean energy and energy efficiency investments to those communities. On September 27, 2023, in anticipation of a statewide effort to track and report on investments and benefits to disadvantaged communities, the Department issued guidance to program administrators, including utilities and NYSERDA, to facilitate the tracking and reporting of ratepayer-funded clean energy and energy efficiency investments. This CLCPA report includes data filed by program administrators for investments from 2020 through 2023 and reveals that $1.6 billion in ratepayer funds have been invested in projects in disadvantaged communities, representing 35.4% of all place-based investments. Including investments made towards low-income households residing outside of disadvantaged communities, results in 60% of all place-based investments going towards projects within disadvantaged communities or to low-income households residing outside of disadvantaged communities. Ratepayer-funded investments for 2024 have been filed by the program administrators, and staff are currently vetting those filings prior to reporting them. Additionally, the Commission continues to advance provisions in rate cases for utilities, including the development and filing of annual disadvantaged communities reports. Next slide, please. Place-based investments are those investments that are directed locally or within communities or can be reasonably directed to communities, for example, retrofit programs. These investments are distinguished from statewide or system-wide investments, for example, large-scale renewable investments, in that system-based investments must occur where the need is on the system or where the resource is located in the case of renewables. As illustrated on this chart, 35.4% of all ratepayer-funded place-based investments across all utilities and NYSERDA were located within disadvantaged communities. It is worth noting that the first 2 years of program data represent programs that were largely designed and implemented prior to the passage of the CLCPA. The data for program years 2022 through 2023 includes an increase in program administrators incorporating provisions for addressing disadvantaged communities through their programs. This same time period also saw an increase in funding for the Energy Affordability Program, which is directed at low-income households. For the purposes of accounting of investments and benefits, low-income households, including those outside of disadvantaged communities, are included within the disadvantaged communities criteria that was released by the Climate Justice Working Group. Next slide, please. This slide breaks down the percentage of those place-based investments by program administrator. The number of disadvantaged communities can vary considerably by utility territory. This is why we seek to optimize the level of disadvantaged communities' investments across the entire portfolio, rather than require each individual program administrator to make 35% of investments within disadvantaged communities. This allows staff to monitor investments by program administrator and optimize the overall portfolio to maximize impacts for those communities. A statewide disadvantaged communities reporting framework is being developed by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation and NYSERDA to measure and track investments and benefits across all state agencies. Next slide, please. Staff issued information requests to NYSERDA and each utility seeking data on the annual amounts for 2023, 2024, and cumulative total amounts for the years 2020 through 2024 of reductions in energy usage and emissions associated with CLCPA programs. The slide here outlines the total emissions reductions associated with energy savings or energy generation these various programs have achieved in this time period, with both 2024 separated out and a cumulative summary of the years 2020 through 2024. For a few of these initiatives, you will see no data available yet, as projects in these programs have not yet reached commercial operation. The development of clean energy resources, coupled with reducing the actual demand for electricity, is helping to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in addition to producing energy savings. Between 2020 through 2024, overall greenhouse gas emissions were reduced by over 88 million metric tons, with the majority of the decrease coming from changes in electricity generation. Next slide, please. For the purposes of estimating the cost recoveries of CLCPA-related initiatives, staff issued information requests to each of the utilities for both gas and electric programs. This slide shows the total cost recoveries associated with gas energy efficiency measures targeted at reducing overall fossil fuel use, broken out by utility in 2023 and 2024. Next slide, please. This slide is focused on electric program-related CLCPA cost recoveries in 2023 and is broken out by utility and by program. As you can see, the majority of cost recoveries are on the electric side, as the CLCPA is focused on transitioning away from the use of fossil fuels, overall energy use reduction, and in developing new renewable energy generation. The slide here includes detailed footnotes, which are also reflected in the report to provide some additional information behind these values. Next slide, please. This slide provides the same information on electric program cost recoveries in 2024. Next slide, please. The annual total statewide cost billed to load-serving entities, or LSEs, by NYSERDA by year for the years 2020 through 2024, as well as the cumulative statewide cost billed to LSEs by NYSERDA from 2020 through 2024, associated with the Clean Energy Standard programs, are detailed here in this table. Cumulative emissions reductions are shown in a prior slide for these programs, but they are also shown here to tie the two together. The majority of billing, as well as savings and emissions reductions, are associated with the Clean Energy Standards Tier 3 Zero Emission Credit Program. This program provides zero-emission electricity to the electric grid and was adopted in 2016 prior to the CLCPA. While the amount of savings and billing are much higher for ZECs for zero-emission credits as compared to other programs under the Clean Energy Standard, these numbers will change and evolve over time as more renewable energy projects achieve commercial operation in support of the CLCPA renewable energy requirements. The information above does not reflect billing for these programs under the Clean Energy Standard that occurred prior to 2020. Next slide, please. This slide provides an overview of the information request to each of the utilities to help estimate the bill impacts associated with the prior CLCPA-related cost recoveries shown in those slides. For both gas and electric utilities, we are providing bill impacts for average-sized customers in the residential, small commercial, and industrial classes to help put these numbers into context for each customer. It is important to note that the rate impacts can vary greatly depending on the utility and the amount of electricity consumed by the individual consumer. The following slides present ratepayer impacts for both gas and electric utility bills for the 2023 and 2024 calendar years, as well as future forecasted impacts for the current 2025 calendar year. We read these numbers as indicative of how the state is choosing to allocate the cost of reforming its energy systems in compliance with the CLCPA. The state's electric and gas utilities already make significant investments to ensure the provision of service to its customers. Therefore, the total estimated costs associated with the CLCPA programs or projects should not be considered as entirely incremental costs to what ratepayers would otherwise pay. In addition, we see variation across customer classes because cost recovery in the delivery rates can be allocated differently depending on the program. In the following slides, I will highlight the residential impacts as examples for each year. Next slide, please. For residential gas customers in 2023, the rate impacts for these investments range from 0.31% to 1.47%, depending on the utility. Next slide, please. For residential gas customers in 2024, the rate impacts for these investments range from 0.4% to 2%, depending on the utility. Next slide, please. For residential gas customers in the forecasted year 2025, the rate impacts for these investments range from 0.3% to 3.6%, depending on the utility. Next slide, please. For residential electric customers in 2023, the rate impacts for these investments range from 4.6% to 10.3%, depending on the utility. Next slide, please. For residential electric customers in 2024, the rate impact for these investments range from 5.2% to 9.5%, depending on the utility. Next slide, please. And for the forecasted year in 2025, residential electric customer rate impacts for these investments range from 4.2% to 7.2%, depending on the utility. Next slide, please. For the first time, this year's report includes projections of future bill impacts in the years 2025 through 2029, broken up by the delivery and supply portions of a utility bill, and what program costs are recovered under each. While the estimated recoveries in customer bills for the 2025 through 2029 period were developed using current information regarding utility bills and program costs, given the complexities for forecasting each element, these estimates are for informational purposes only and should be considered high-level estimates. This slide and the next slide present examples of residential electric and residential gas forecasted utility bill impacts. Next slide, please. This slide presents the same information but for gas forecasted utility bill impacts. And the information in print on the slide is very small, but there is a full appendix for each utility included within the CLCPA report. Next slide, please. This annual report is a review of actual costs incurred by ratepayers to date in support of various programs and projects that support the goals of the CLCPA. When the CLCPA was enacted, it did not come with a dedicated funding source, and thus, the main source of funding to achieve its objectives is through utility rates. While the report shows that CLCPA costs are a component of utility bills, these costs are far from being the primary component of rates and remain a small portion of a customer's total utility bill. The report also highlights the unprecedented demand growth New York is experiencing, while at the same time needing to make significant investments in aging utility infrastructure. These factors, combined with rising commodity prices and equipment costs, directly result in increases to customer utility bills. Next slide, please. It is important to note that the Commission authorized many of the programs and estimated costs in this report prior to CLCPA enactment, and it makes it challenging to split out the portion of initiatives exclusively linked to the CLCPA. The costs associated with these authorized programs will be recovered over several years to come based on the implementation schedules for these projects or programs, and will mitigate the cost impacts to ratepayers year over year. Additionally, these initiatives will result in a variety of other changes that will impact how much consumers will pay for energy. A number of these would put downward pressure on cost, including benefits in the form of reduced energy usage and therefore reduced energy bills to consumers. There are also several other direct and indirect benefits from CLCPA implementation that are difficult to standardize and quantify in a yearly report. The second CLCPA report focuses solely on the portion of programs over which this Commission has regulatory oversight. It doesn't include other non-ratepayer-funded programs that are being executed by other state agencies to achieve the goals of the CLCPA. nor does it include the customer side costs of adoption of technologies like heating and ventilation equipment. Being able to compare data across programs is an important means of assessing both relative and overall effectiveness and is indispensable to making CLCPA implementation transparent to the public. Taken together, the measures described in this report demonstrate how the Commission is implementing the CLCPA consistent with statutory direction, while ensuring safe and reliable service, supporting vulnerable consumers, and moderating ratepayer impacts. In furtherance of these priorities, the department staff will continue to refine our data collection methodologies, comparability, and accessibility in future CLCPA reports to improve transparency and overall accountability. This concludes my presentation, and I'd like to thank the staff here and the many additional staff throughout this department who not only contributed to this report, but spend every day implementing the objectives of this law and the Commission's other important responsibilities. Thank you, and the staff team and I are here to answer your questions.
Thank you for the presentation and the overview, and thank you to everyone who worked on this. Again, I echo Jess's praise. This is a monumental piece of work. Appreciate the level of detail that went into putting this report together. Again, it's a tremendous undertaking, requiring input from everyone in the department as a whole. And to me, it serves as a reminder of the significant work that the department itself has put forward into making a reality of the CLCPA's goals. And as head of the department, I'm proud to see the incredible work that has been done thus far to get us to this point today. And I think this report does a great job of, again, laying out that progress, highlighting where we are, showing what the challenges are, and what the future opportunities may hold. Key thing to keep in mind in all this, and this is a conversation I have often in different venues, is this is part of a transition of our energy system. And transitions are not easy. It's rare for any society to cast off the habits of one age and fully embrace the possibilities of another. I'm still waiting to find a paperless office, and I've been waiting for almost 30 years for that to happen. I don't think I'm going to see one. I still enjoy the warmth of a fireplace from time to time, despite what that means from an emissions standpoint. And I find that we all have various habits that we've developed over the years that we carry with us. Change is daunting, and change at the scope, scale, and timeline as directed by the CLCPA is frankly, even at the best of times, epic. And the last few years have been anything but the best of times. When passed in 2019, no one could have foreseen the sequence of shocks and events that we've experienced in the last few years. You know the list: the pandemic, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the supply chain disruptions, interest rates, inflations. Any one of these things would have been a major stumbling block, but we've hit them all, one after another after another. And these various impacts have been compounded further by a federal administration that has taken steps to, frankly, dismantle what has been decades of careful planning and progress. Of note, the executive order banning offshore wind happened 4 hours after the inauguration. But the headwinds don't stop there. We've long known of the challenges our aging infrastructure present. We now see a time of increased electric demand, something we haven't seen in quite some time. And we have other factors, property taxes and other things, layering additional costs. Costs that, when put together with the various macroeconomic and geopolitical realities just mentioned, account for a very significant portion of what we're seeing impacting utility bills today. These are not abstract challenges, and these are not meant to be excuses. This is the reality. They are factors that make our work harder and make progress more expensive. And they matter because the CLCPA, one of the most ambitious climate laws in the world, is funded through utility rates. Following the law, the Commission has to choose the most prudent actions, one that is aligned with our mandate in public service law to provide safe and adequate service and at just and reasonable rates. Now, the report we just saw, its findings show the prudence of that work. And yes, the costs of the CLCPA are part of utility rates, but they remain a relatively small portion of the customer's total bill. Each and every decision that we have made as a commission has been deliberate and measured. Staff consistently weigh the costs and benefits of various actions, and time again, we make decisions that are best for the public, in the public interest. This is an unwavering commitment. We're often caught in the crossfire of opinions. Some will say that we are not going far enough, that we are behind on our goals. Some say that we are going too quickly, that we're spending too much money too fast on a CLCPA implementation. And sometimes we hear the same argument from the same voice in the same sentence. Neither of these extremes are true. The CLCPA has many goals, and an important indication of success thus far is our achievement of the 6 gigawatt by 2025 goal, going a step further to get 10 gigawatts and actually beyond, achieving that goal both ahead of schedule and under budget. Our efforts to direct funding to disadvantaged communities have also proved to be successful, with, as you pointed out, over 35% of investments going to those communities and 60% of all place-based investments in projects that benefit both DACs and low-income households. Again, the list goes on and on. I don't want to detail every accomplishment. The presentation did an amazing job of detailing all of that, and the report an even better outline in detail. So I'll close with this. What I often hear is a focus on what we are doing or not doing. And what this framing misses is the fact that the energy we need isn't, again, it's not in the abstract. It's the results of actions each and every single one of us take on a day-to-day basis. The way we use energy in our everyday lives impacts the actions that we at the Commission must ultimately take to meet our CLCPA objectives. And here lies the crucial insight. The clean energy future will not be won by technology and regulation alone. It requires we change in how we use energy, how we manage that energy in our day-to-day lives. The more efficient we are with the energy we use, the less of it we need, and the energy we use can be the cleanest and is usually cheapest too. So, ultimately, as those of you who will point fingers at what we have done, whoever you may be, it's worth remembering the challenge we are trying to overcome extends beyond the reach of the Commission in some ways. It's a social one. We must look within at the change that we can do to support the goals that we as an agency and as a state are trying to accomplish. The CLCPA sets a direction, but it does not prescribe specific steps. And this is made evident today by the various artfully designed programs that staff have put together, both predating the CLCPA and since its creation. So again, as we continue to work, advancing our various efforts, much of that work will focus on the role of individuals, and their role and actions will become increasingly important in achieving these various outcomes. So again, thank you for the presentation. Commissioner Alisi. Thank you. Commissioner Valesky.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few very brief thoughts. And first to the Chair's comment about those who like to point fingers. My comment to those who like to point fingers would be read this report before you point any more fingers, because there's an awful lot of phenomenal information in there. You all did a tremendous job, and, you know, not a session goes by that we don't all say this in some various format. Most of what comes before us, though, is required by law. The thing about this report that I find perhaps most fascinating, the law itself, the CLCPA, did not require you to do this report. But you, I mean the royal you, here at the agency, I think my read anyway is you think enough about accountability and transparency that despite a heck of a lot of work that you knew it was going to take, you came to the commission a few years ago and said, you know, we had better do what we all sort of refer to as a CLCPA tracker. But again, law didn't tell you to do that. Nobody told you to do that except yourselves, and that's a pretty good testament, I think, to what public service should be. So thanks for practicing public service the way it should be practiced. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Majori.
Thank you. So I think this is an excellent report, and I want to thank everybody who worked on it. It's chock full of information. And I also want to acknowledge that I was one of the commissioners who had asked, when the first report was presented, that the next report include future projected costs, which this report does. So I want to thank you. I wasn't the only one, but not at all. But but I want to acknowledge that and thank you. And I'm going to ask you some questions because I think in a report that has this much information, it would be easy to like skim over it and get the wrong impression of what this report is saying. And you said this in your own presentation, and the chair made a comment that the CLCPA, the law itself, does not prescribe specific steps to take. So I think that it is necessary to be transparent and not to be, cute, to report on the projected costs of programs and policies that are in alignment with our achieving CLCPA goals. That's the language we use, or language similar to that, in alignment. You said this yourself, and you said in your presentation, it's impossible to disentangle programs that are in alignment with the CLCPA from costs that are incurred because of the CLCPA. So I'm going to ask this question in a couple different ways. Is there a single dollar that's projected that can be directly attributed to the CLCPA?
The short answer to that would be no.
Yeah.
And I think, one of the things that I mentioned and, others have commented on is we have more than 27 years of implementing clean energy and energy efficiency programs. And so all of those programs and efforts roll into the future of programs that were referred to in the CLCPA, including energy efficiency. And so it's very hard to point to any one specific dollar.
Yeah. And just to add to that, I mean, I'm reiterating something that you yourself said. There's programs in here that we're reporting on that I think, for the sake of transparency, which is an end unto itself, that I think we advance that end in this report. We report on programs like New York Sun, right? That predated the CLCPA, right?
It did. I think folks forget about that because the New York Sun program is the branding of the effort that exists today to support distributed solar projects. But the actual support for distributed solar projects goes back another 10 plus years before New York Sun was even created.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask a variation of the question I just asked, but just in a different way because I don't want anybody to think that I'm asking a trick question. Is there any program or policy in here that was implemented that you think we wouldn't have done but for the CLCPA?
It's a good question. No.
Yeah.
I think is a very direct answer. One of the things that we recognize in the report and, address in the presentation is it would be impossible for us to know exactly what we would have done if the CLCPA was never passed.
Yeah.
A lot of those programs were already in flight. The pace at which we would have made investment decisions to meet renewable energy targets or some of the other elements of the CLCPA, we don't know if that pace would have changed. And at the end of the day, I think another important thing the report recognizes is using energy generation as an example. We are going to need new energy generation. The CLCPA gave us specific targets about what that mix should look like. But we still would have made investments in generation. So it's very hard to say, whether or not we would have done something if the CLCPA never existed and whether or not if we would have made different choices. So it's a good question.
In fact, other states that don't have the CLCPA or their own version of the CLCPA have made clean energy investments. If West Virginia, a big coal state, or Texas, a big oil state, which do not have their own versions of the CLCPA, were asked to put together a report like this, they're opposite numbers of ours, right? The PUCT in Texas and the PSC in West Virginia could point to efforts that they took to help advance clean energy initiatives. Is that correct?
That's correct. I'm not aware of a report that they issue,
They
but
don't.
but if they did, I would read it.
Yeah.
No, I think that's a very good reference point.
Yeah.
A lot of other states have, either have very clear renewable energy portfolio standards or they don't. But those same states that don't are also investing in clean generation.
Yeah. Okay, the one other thing I'm going to point out, which again, I'm just reiterating something that you said and that I think is crystal clear if you actually read the report, is the report goes over drivers to rate increases, the majority of which have nothing to do with the CLCPA whatsoever, right?
Yep.
Okay. And the only reason I'm asking this line of question is somebody's going to write that crazy law is the reason that your utility bill is going up. And that's just not true. And I think the benefit of this level of transparency, if you read the whole thing, and it takes a lot of words in order to explain the full context, is it shows how that's not true.
I agree with you. To some of the comments that have already been made, I do think there is a lot of reporting on what the CLCPA is and isn't doing to utility rates. This report reflects the staff team's best effort at trying to provide transparency into how real that is or not. And then I think the other thing that you pointed out in your comments is even within the CLCPA cost, there are still investments in that bucket that we would have made that aren't even related to the CLCPA.
Right.
Energy efficiency, other things that we would have been investing in. And energy efficiency is a great example because it does provide a direct consumer benefit, but energy efficiency also provides a system-wide benefit. It reduces the total demand on the system and avoids the need for other more costly infrastructure upgrades to meet increased demand.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well done.
Thank you. Commissioner Bright.
Thank you, Jess, and the full team. I mean, this is just as echoing everybody's comments to say this is such a comprehensive and excellent report with a lot of good stuff in it. And like Commissioner Valesky said, this is not legally mandated that we do this, but we've chosen to do that. And I think that it's a worthwhile and very well done effort. I just have one question. One thing that we mentioned in this report is the greenhouse gas emissions inventory. So I just wanted to, for now, talk about a little bit about the status of that and see how that might inform future reports.
Sure. I think are you referring to the greenhouse gas emission inventory directed by the Commission? Yes. We are still working. We had a number of filings from the utilities, and we are still working through what that future framework should look like. There have also been changes into emission accounting methodologies at the state level. And so whatever we direct our utilities to do, we want to make sure that it's consistent with that. Or, if there are things that we should be doing differently, take that into account. And so we do anticipate that a future order will come to the Commission to establish a consistent reporting methodology across all utilities.
That sounds great. And I had another in this report, we do talk a little bit about direct and indirect benefits that might not necessarily be quantified. Also, how we're really just focused on what the Commission actions are. That said, I'm curious if we're thinking about drawing from different sources of information in the future that can help us better assess the bigger picture, like job creation or economic development, or what is happening that is improving sort of equity in disadvantaged communities. So you mentioned a little bit earlier that NYSERDA is doing a disadvantaged community framework. So, something like that where we're drawing from other agencies to sort of inform some of this report.
Yeah, it's a great point. The report itself is lengthy. And at some point, you have to draw a box around what you want to include in it. And so the box thus far has been around direct emissions reductions related to programs. And it doesn't capture things like what's reported in the Clean Energy Jobs report that NYSERDA issues every year. In the future, we could potentially reference that as part of, one of the broader benefits that we don't directly capture, tied to a specific dollar that's ratepayer funded, right? And so I think it's important to kind of contextualize what this report is really reporting on. It's dollars and direct benefits associated with it. However, the jobs that, the clean energy transition has supported in the state are very significant. And so I do think in the future, there might be a potential for us to point to those. The other thing that we, often get asked to discuss, whether it's in the context of this report or just broader commission efforts, is health benefits. And, we definitely recognize that a lot of the efforts within this report do contribute to improved air quality and health benefits. There are a number of different statistics you can look at to assess that value. I also think that the state energy planning process that's underway right now does a really good job of discussing those other indirect benefits. And so this report is not the only accounting of the benefits that the state is receiving as a result of clean energy investments. It's the commission's programs and the direct benefits associated with it. But I think at some point we drew a box. That box can change, and that's part of what we recognize at the end of the presentation.
Well, kudos to the full team. This is a really great report, and I really appreciate all the work and effort that went into it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Sheehan.
I just have to talk to Commissioner Bright about stealing my questions. It's all right. I'm going to echo what everybody has already said. This is a tremendous report, a great job. I know it's been a lot of work for all of you, so appreciate it, and for the folks who aren't in the room but have contributed to this. I think it's important to celebrate and recognize success, which is, I think, what this report does too, in terms of the progress that has been made in a short period of time to reduce emissions, to advance renewable energy, to advance distributed energy resources. I kudos to everyone who has been working on those programs and making those things happen. And I think this report really should be seen as a huge success from the work that's been done, especially, as the chair pointed out, in the face of very significant headwinds that no one could have predicted in 2019. So, we know this is under scrutiny, and many people think we need to move faster and harder, and but I just want to give us take a pause and at least pat yourself on the back for what's been achieved so far. As noted, there are costs to this, and depending on where you sit, they're either too high or relatively low. But we have to keep our eye on that, and I think that the transparency of this report is going to help us do that, and the continuing progress on that, the continuing reports and being able to be, answer to those questions, I think is important to the dialogue around this. Associated with the cost conversation has to be the benefits, which I think some of those are here, but as noted by Commissioner Bright, this isn't a full analysis of all the benefits associated with programs designed to reduce climate emissions. So, I do think a more robust conversation about that, not that it's for us for this report, but I do think that's valuable if we're going to have a conversation about the cost of addressing climate change. And then just finally, I do want to echo what the chair said, that we are in the midst of a transition. We are facing even more significant headwinds that we were before. But I know, speaking for myself, that we remain committed to the CLCPA. And from my perspective, the arc of progress is always going to move towards a cleaner system. And it may not be a straight line, but we're going to get there. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Commissioner Villova.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for the great report. I'm going to jump right into questions. Similar to my colleagues, I found the report's discussion of the drivers for customer bill increases to be very compelling. We typically get to address rate drivers in individual utility rate cases and don't often get the chance to take a statewide look at broader trends that impact customers across multiple utility territories. And my question is, what does it mean, or what are utilities' options typically for dealing with aging infrastructure? And what scale are we talking about in terms of the amount of infrastructure involved and the cost?
It's a good question. And it refers to, in terms of when we say that infrastructure is approaching the end of its useful life, that can be an opaque term. And what that refers to is the significant portion of New York's utility infrastructure that is approaching or well beyond the end of their expected operational lifespan. And that brings increased risk in the form of component failures, service disruptions, and costly emergency repairs. I don't have an exact number of the age of all the infrastructure components across all utilities on hand easily today. However, the report does provide some representative examples, including those highlighted in my presentation and report, and the thousands of miles of underground infrastructure approaching 100 years in age. 100 years, just to put it in perspective, is well beyond the average service life for this type of equipment, which typically ranges between 70 and 85 years. So, when we think about how to address it, there's been an increase in underground cable failures over the past few years, and that underscores the urgent need for a detailed assessment to identify asset conditions, maintenance, and operational needs. And there are several programs and processes in place to address that aging infrastructure. The first would be the thorough reviews that the staff team here conducts and ultimately presents to the Commission of capital expenditures that are proposed in utility rate cases. But what the public may not fully appreciate is the work doesn't stop there from the staff team's perspective. In those cases, we look at, infrastructure investments proposed, we review them, we scrutinize them, we determine their actual need in the near term versus those that may not be needed and, strike a careful balance in that. But after those plans are approved, the staff team meets with the utilities very routinely to review progress on capital projects, review how those projects are being prioritized, address things that maybe they didn't anticipate when they put in their rate case, but they're urgently needed now from a safety and reliability perspective. And it also includes other initiatives like the long-term planning initiatives that we do throughout the agency. We named one of them today, the coordinated grid planning process, and actions there that we take to address near-term urgent infrastructure project needs, like what we're doing through the proactive planning proceeding. So there are a number of different efforts, and I think it's important to contextualize that each one of them plays a very specific role, but it gives us options to be able to not be bound within the context of a one-time rate case, but think strategically about needs as they come up, and when needed, make sure that we prioritize urgent infrastructure needs.
Thank you. And I appreciate that additional context. Can any of the programs we have established prior to or as a direct result of the CLCPA help to avoid having to replace some of this aging infrastructure? And if so, if you can provide some examples, that would be great.
I think, we named a couple of them. I think that, we are constantly striking a balance between looking proactively into the future and making those necessary infrastructure investments versus the impact that those have on rates. And so with every new interconnection request that comes in from a customer, that's a very careful balance that we take. And, one of the examples I could provide to you is we have some utilities and substations that were designed to serve very rural communities, right? And now what we're seeing for the first time in a very long time is massive new infrastructure projects seeking to locate in those communities. So if you have a substation that's designed to serve, rural community, few houses, farms, and then you introduce, a new 100 megawatt project, whether it's affordable housing or, an industrial or commercial customer, the grid is just not designed to be that flexible. And it would be unfair to say that the utilities weren't making the right investments, because they were. They were making the right investments to serve the needs of the communities that they were providing that service to at that time. But these types of infrastructure projects continue to come at us. And I think, as a staff team, as a commission, we've proven over the last year that we're nimble, that we're going to authorize new proceedings to address those urgent infrastructure challenges and change the way that we think about approaching system planning. So the report is iterative. The prior item that was before you today was also an iterative process. And I think it's important to just keep that in context when we think about infrastructure investments, the way that we design programs, and the way that we approve those projects when they come to us for need.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Just checking what has already been answered. I'd like to confirm my understanding of the report's approach, methodological and analytical approach towards assessing the CLCPA cost and benefits. So I'm just going to state what I understand to be the case, and if you can just confirm whether that's correct. So first, it's much easier to identify the dollars going into funding the programs that we have specifically launched in response to the CLCPA. It's much more difficult to calculate the dollars that come back out of those programs and either return to ratepayers as direct benefits or have broader system efficiency benefits or non-energy benefits like health, for example. Number three, it's also challenging to identify which programs and projects exist specifically because of the CLCPA and wouldn't have existed otherwise, since the CLCPA built on and incorporated existing commission action from decades prior. Number four, the programs and projects that support CLCPA implementation, whether they exist directly because of the CLCPA or predate it, have provided and will continue to provide identifiable benefits to ratepayers and the environment. For example, direct benefits, as you had mentioned earlier, through energy efficiency, and broader system benefits such as through proactive planning. And lastly, the investments we're making in the CLCPA are intended to have a positive effect on customer rates, either directly or indirectly. They're intended to make the energy system more efficient and affordable, but they may not be enough to counteract the rate pressures that you've discussed thus far, like aging infrastructure, like load growth and things like that. Is that all correct? Is that a good summation of my understanding?
Yes, I would agree with all of those statements.
Okay, thank you. I have a few final observations, and this is something that you have observed, Jessica, and that my colleagues have observed, but I think it's a point worth hammering home more than once. The CLCPA is an unfunded mandate. The New York legislature enacted it without providing any for any funding for achieving those mandates. Achieving those mandates requires the energy industry in New York, both electric and gas utilities, to take significant action, like improving energy efficiency and increasing customer access to renewable energy. And doing so means investing in real projects and programs that have upfront and ongoing costs that someone has to pay for. Because the legislature enacted the CLCPA without providing any funding for achieving its mandates, and many of those requirements relate to the energy sector, the primary source of funding for those programs by default is New York utility ratepayers. At the same time, as we've already discussed, the programs and projects that the Commission has authorized pre-CLCPA, post-CLCPA are designed to deliver both near and long-term benefits to ratepayers, and the report already describes many of the benefits that have materialized. So the appropriate response to all of this, from my perspective, is for us to honor us, not just the Commission, not just folks in this room, but the legislature, utility stakeholders, To honor our commitment to the CLCPA and the benefits it provides, and to support its successful implementation for the continued benefit of New Yorkers. The answer is not to finger point at rate increases when there is no other current pathway to pay for implementation, and especially when, as the report describes, there are other, more significant rate drivers. The CLCPA has been delivering and will continue to deliver benefits, and it should do so in a way that pulls from a variety of funding resources. And of course, as we continue to do this, the Commission will also continue to prioritize its primary statutory mandate of ensuring safe and reliable service at just and reasonable rates. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. As this is a discussion item for information purposes, there will be no vote. Thank you. We will now move on to our third and final item for discussion today. Thank you, everyone. Item 301, case 24-E-0364, as it relates to the proposed proactive planning framework. It'll be presented today by Skylar Mattison. Stephanie McDermott will be available for questions. Thank you, Skylar. When you're ready, please begin.
Good afternoon, Chair Christian and Commissioners. My name is Skylar Madison, and I am the Clean Energy Planning Lead in the Office of Marxton Innovation. The draft order before you represents the second major action within the proactive planning proceeding under case 24-E-0364. If adopted, the draft order would implement a study framework to more granularly assess electric system upgrades that arise due to the electrification of buildings and transportation, as well as economic development and the deployment of distributed energy resources, or DERs. The proactive planning for upgraded electric grid infrastructure proceeding was initiated in August of 2024 after the need for advanced electrification planning was identified through the research, development, and stakeholder engagement that occurred within the medium and heavy-duty electric vehicle proceeding. In that proceeding, staff identified a timing disconnect between how new loads related to transportation and building electrification arrive on the grid and how the associated expansion of the grid is planned and implemented. Adding new load can be quick and easy, while upgrading the electric system is often complex and time-consuming. Proactive planning allows the state to get ahead of this issue, identifying where loads will arise and proactively deploying grid upgrades to accelerate the adoption of clean technology in New York State. In a previous action in this proceeding, the initiating order created a one-time opportunity for the utilities to submit, if necessary, urgent upgrade proposals for grid upgrades that could not wait until a full planning framework was completed. The urgent upgrade proposals were filed in November 2024, and the order addressing urgent upgrade proposals, adopted in June of this year, authorized 29 projects enabling over 600 megawatts of electrification statewide. The ultimate purpose of the proactive planning proceeding, as laid out in the initiating order, and the purpose of the draft order before you today, is to establish a framework that lays out a single, unified process across the joint utilities to ensure that the state's electric grid can accommodate the state's policy targets related to transportation and building electrification, economic development, and the deployment of DERs. As opposed to the Coordinated Grid Planning Process, or CGPP, which uses a top-down approach suited for higher voltage infrastructure investments, the proactive planning framework will conduct granular, bottom-up modeling better suited to forecasting upgrades to distribution and local network infrastructure. Consistent with the directives of the initiating order, the joint utilities submitted their framework filing outlining a proposed study process on December 13, 2024. The guiding principles of the joint utilities framework filing stated that customer needs should be met in a timely manner, that it should support achievement of objectives of policies, laws, and regulations, that it should be cost efficient, that it should be flexible, and that it should complement other regulatory processes. The joint utilities indicated that the framework would identify grid infrastructure investments necessary to achieve relevant state laws and policies and would consider compliance with regulations and goals. The joint utilities described the planning scope for the framework as identifying needs with greater granularity than processes in other proceedings, and proposed a recurring study process that would include 4 stages. load assessment, planning and solution design, project eligibility and prioritization, and project authorization. Though the initiating order directed the joint utilities to develop a single, unified, and proactive planning process across all utilities, the joint utilities filing failed to incorporate all aspects of the planning process laid out in the initiating order. The deviations from the initiating order seem to be driven by the difficulty of coordinating efforts across the utilities, especially in the development of more granular studies, where the utilities are currently at different stages in the adoption of new forecasting and planning methods. The framework filings submitted by the joint utilities lacked clarity on topics such as alignment of methodology and the identification of load assumptions, and it defers key decision-making until unspecified future dates. The framework filing also lists several sources for the development of load forecasts, but does not explain how those sources may be used to create a comprehensive load forecast. Despite certain gaps in detail in the joint utilities filing, extensive stakeholder comments have provided additional detail to fill those gaps, which has allowed for the development of a complete proactive planning framework. The draft order therefore adopts the framework filing submitted by the joint utilities with modifications addressing the gaps in the submission. Regarding stakeholder comments, 14 sets of thorough and thoughtful comments were submitted, addressing forecasting methodologies, data requirements, stakeholder engagement, ratepayer impacts, cost allocation, project evaluation criteria, alignment with other proceedings, record keeping, and a variety of other topics. For example, EDF provided many useful comments, including suggestions on data sources and study methodologies that were indispensable in reviewing the framework filing. Earth Justice provided information that guided recommendations on the treatment of DERs. Multiple interveners provided numerous suggestions on cost recovery and the study process, while New York City provided input on rate case interactions and other components of the planning process. Many other stakeholders also provided helpful input, and staff is grateful for their efforts in the crafting of this important process. Moving to the design of the proactive planning framework itself, the framework is intended to improve the utility's ability to identify and address grid needs associated with building and transportation electrification, along with rapidly evolving economic development opportunities and the deployment of DERs. Traditional methods of relying on simple ratios or estimates to downscale system-wide forecasts for each of those components are no longer sufficient in forecasting the size, timing, and specific location of new loads. To avoid the likely errors that would occur using less granular study methods, the draft order directs the joint utilities to take extra care in developing their granular forecasts, which will serve as the basis of the planning process. The load forecasts require significant effort in identifying data sources, crafting assumptions, and developing methodologies for forecasting and combining subcomponents of the load forecast. The draft order directs the joint utilities to work with various stakeholders and state entities, including the New York ISO, building and housing developers, fleet and depot operators, and others to develop their granular forecasts. Given the importance of the underlying data sources and the construction of the load forecast, the draft order directs the utilities to develop a proactive planning framework methodology document to be filed within 60 days of the order that outlines key data sources and methods that will be relied on during the proactive planning study process. The document shall be prepared and filed collectively amongst the joint utilities, with variations among utility assumptions kept to a minimum. Where uniformity in sources and assumptions is not possible, the methodology document should explain the reason for those differences. The proactive planning methodology document is expected to serve as a resource for stakeholders as well as for future cycles of the proactive planning study process. The draft order therefore directs the utilities to hold a technical conference, presenting the details of the methodology document to stakeholders within 60 days of filing the document. This development of new, more granular forecasts across the state is also expected to be an important source of information beyond the proactive planning proceeding, and is expected to inform future CGPP cycles, utility sales forecasts, gas planning work, and future rate cases. The draft order directs the utilities to utilize the new data extensively and requires the utilities to file annual reports describing how the granular proactive planning forecasts are utilized in other processes. The final product of the proceeding is the filing of a proactive planning study report, a document compiled by the joint utilities that identifies grid needs driven by electrification, economic development, or DER deployment, for which proactive investment would improve overall cost effectiveness, minimize ratepayer impacts, and support policy outcomes. The proactive planning study report will describe how each utility followed the methodology outlined in the methodology document to develop a granular forecast and analyze the infrastructure in each service territory to identify upgrades necessary to meet the forecast. As in the CGPP and urgent upgrades process, the draft order directs the utilities to assess the potential of grid-enhancing technologies to alleviate the needs identified through the planning process, and they are encouraged to propose projects that enhance flexibility and manage timeline and cost uncertainty. The draft order also directs the utilities to follow the tracking methodology utilized within the CGPP to account for impacts on disadvantaged communities, which requires additional scrutiny of any upgrades that may be cited in disadvantaged communities and on evaluation of opportunities for directing benefits to and reducing burdens on those locations. The Proactive Planning Study Report will ultimately include a set of project proposals deemed by the utilities to meet the evaluation and prioritization criteria. The proposed projects will be evaluated according to the same criteria identified in the urgent upgrades order, with the exception of the specific urgency definition, which had previously been based on a specific deadline. For the new urgency evaluation, to be eligible for authorization through this proceeding, projects must require early investment that would otherwise not be available under current rate proceeding schedules. Any projects authorized through the proceeding will also follow the same extensive reporting requirements as those applies to the urgent upgrade projects, and the draft order requires the joint utilities to file status reports every quarter. The draft order directs the joint utilities to file the first proactive planning study report within 1 year of the issuance of the order, and earlier if possible, so a full picture of current and future grid needs driven by electrification, economic development, and DERs can be known. Continuing the proceedings' commitment to engagement and transparency, the draft order also directs the joint utilities to hold a technical conference within 30 days of filing the study report, allowing stakeholders to comment on the proposed projects. The draft order does not adopt a single pathway for cost allocation or recovery due to the significant variability in the type and drivers of proactive planning project proposals. These factors will be determined on a case-by-case basis during the reviews of individual project proposals. The draft order before you creates a new and detailed proactive planning framework, directing the joint utilities to follow a methodical and transparent process of data collection, assumptions development, and grid modeling. At each step of the process, documentation and stakeholder engagement are prioritized in an effort to produce the most comprehensive, accurate, and well-supported outcomes possible. The results of the process will then return to the Commission for review at the end of each cycle, while staff remain deeply engaged through the work. Thank you very much, and now Stephanie McDermott and I are available for questions.
Thank you, Skylar. One, I commend your enthusiasm and wish I had some right now. I'm tired today. I have a prepared statement I wanted to make, but I don't see how much I can add beyond what you've said. I do want to highlight something that occurred to me as you were talking regarding the consistency and uniformity of the utilities. I think about the beginning of the power system, Pearl Street, the expansion of the grid, the ultimate coalescing of different utilities into power pools, sharing resources, sharing generation, connecting through transmission, lowering costs for ratepayers. And that ultimately led to what we have with the New York ISO. But it was bringing together a lot of different resources in a unified way to work together. And I see a parallel to that happening here through this order today at a much more granular and local level. So I'm excited to see where that will go and how significant that impact will make our jobs a lot easier going forward. So I'm excited by the potential and the opportunity this represents, and appreciate the work you, Stephanie, you, Skylar, have put into this, because I think this opens up a whole new world of potential for us. And thank you for that. Commissioner Lisi.
I'll be more succinct. Based on all the effort and based on the fact that I have no pertinent questions, I'll be voting yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Valesky.
Thank you, Skylar. Thank you, Stephanie. I have no comments or questions. Thanks.
Commissioner Majori.
Thank you. It was a great presentation. I have nothing controversial or counterintuitive to say. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner Bryant.
So I'll make a quick comment. I don't have favorites, but I always appreciate when you guys are in front of us. This is a fantastic order in front of us, and as stakeholders are always important, but it's clear that they were very important in this instance. So we're adopting several of their recommendations into the framework, and I appreciate all the work that has gone into this. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Commissioner Sheehan.
I share Commissioner Bright's thanks. Skylar and Stephanie, I told you this before, Skylar, but it's very clear this was an intensive effort. You worked very closely with stakeholders. It comes through in the order, and I applaud you. The thing that I have communicated with you, and I think is in this order, and that I'm very pleased about, is that the concept of an urgent upgrade project, if we do this right, will become the exception. That by data collection, improved planning, we're going to see these projects in rate cases, which is where they belong. But we have to get there, just like we said. You know, we're in a transition. We have changes happening rapidly. This framework, I think, helps us do that. And kudos to both of you for an excellent job. So thank you.
Thank you. And Commissioner Villova.
Thank you. Yeah, I echo everyone's thanks. Great work. I have two observations. One is that, as far as I'm aware, very few states or utilities have established such a comprehensive framework. I think New York is one of the first states to do that, which means you both and your team have had to figure out how to do this without having any examples of how to do it. So kudos to you for that. And number two, this is exactly the kind of transparent, comprehensive, well-coordinated planning framework that can make the energy system more efficient and that can fulfill some of the vision of the CLCPA as we were talking about earlier. So thank you.
Thank you. Since this is a voting item, I'll now do a call for vote. My vote is in favor of the recommendations contained in the draft order as discussed. Commissioner Alisi, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Valesky?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Majori?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Bryant?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Sheehan?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Villova?
Yes.
Thank you. The item is approved and the recommendations are adopted. Now, with that, we'll move to the consent agenda. Do any commissioners wish to comment on or recuse from voting on any items on today's consent agenda? I'll begin with Commissioner Alisi.
I'll be supporting all items.
Thank you. Commissioner Valesky.
No comments or recusals.
Thank you. Commissioner Majori.
No comments or recusals.
Thank you. Commissioner Bright.
No comments or recusals.
Commissioner Sheehan.
I have no comments. I am recused from items 365 and 380.
Item 365 and 380 are recusals for Commissioner Sheehan. Thank you. And Commissioner Villova?
I have no comments, and I'm also recused from item 365.
And item 365 for Commissioner Villova. Thank you. Oh, okay. All right. My vote is in favor of the recommendations to adopt a consent agenda. Commissioner Alisi, how do you vote?
Yes on all items.
Thank you. Commissioner Valesky?
Yes on all items.
Thank you. Commissioner Majori?
Yes on all items.
Thank you. Commissioner Bright?
Yes on all items.
Thank you. Commissioner Sheehan?
Yes on all items except 365 and 380, from which I'm recused.
Thank you. And Commissioner Villova?
I am recusing from item 365, otherwise yes on the remaining items.
Thank you. And with that, the items are approved. The recommendations are adopted. Madam Secretary, is there anything else to come before us today?
No.
All right.
No.
Thank you. With that, I adjourn today's meeting. Thank you, everyone.